Chapter 1627. Elder Bai Tong didn't know what to say, so he shut his mouth in embarrassment. Nanyu Xing frowned and looked at Nanny with a scrutinizing gaze. Why are you speaking up for that person? This sister of his had been pampered since she was young. Normally, even the people in the family who wanted to hear a good word from her might not have the qualifications to do so. And that young man was just a stranger. It was really inconceivable that she would say such words. Nanny's face heated up from his stare. She looked away and said guiltily, I'm not speaking up for him. I'm not speaking up for him, I'm just telling the truth. Big brother, have you forgotten that before we left, father repeatedly told us not to casually stir up trouble outside? Nanyu Xing looked at her speechlessly. It was hard for her to remember this. Unfortunately, she seemed to have forgotten that father had specially said these words to her. He didn't provoke us first. Why do we have to find trouble with him? Nanny pursed her lips. When that man looked over, his gaze was extremely indifferent and he didn't even look at her. I'm tired. I want to rest. Nanyu Xing could only shake his head helplessly at Nanny's words. All right. Let's not pursue the matter, right? You're right. We're already in the Red Soul Forest and will be able to enter the God-slaying tomb tomorrow morning. It's indeed better to avoid trouble. He looked around and pointed at a certain spot. Let's go there and rest first. Then the few of them walked over. As they walked, Nanny looked back a few times. Unfortunately, the night was dark and she couldn't see that elegant figure dressed in white. She retracted her gaze in disappointment and sat down behind a large rock with Nanyu Xing. Nanyu Xing glanced at her from the corner of his eye and his eyes darkened. How could Nanny's thoughts escape his eyes? She wasn't being kind. It was most likely that she had taken a fancy to that man just now. Nanyu Xing frowned. Actually, Nanny was already of marriageable age, but she was very playful and didn't take a fancy to any of the men that her family wanted to introduce her to. There was once when her father wanted to arrange a marriage for her, but in the end, she still ruined it. Later on, her father simply let her go and stopped caring about these things. He was just waiting for her to settle down. She didn't expect that she would actually take a fancy to a man whose identity she didn't even know, outside the Scarlet Soul Forest? Of course not. Nanyu Xing sat cross-legged, tapping his fingers on his knees. If she was just a little bit moved, then so be it. If he really did something because of this, he would have to think about it again. Elders, did you see that person's strength just now? Nanyu Xing asked after pondering for a moment. The two elders looked at each other and shook their heads. His aura is hidden very deeply. He must have used some kind of divine artifact to conceal it. Nanyu Xing paused. The two elders' eyesight was extremely good. Even they could not see through it. This proved that the other party did have some skills. Besides, both parties were so close to each other just now, but they didn't even notice the existence of that man. If he hadn't happened to look up and see, in short, that man was not to be underestimated. You have to be careful when you're outside. Nanyu Xing said. Besides, we're going to enter the God-slaying tomb tomorrow. We can't make any mistakes. The two elders' expressions turned solemn. Yes. Besides, since he's here, it's very likely that he's here for the God-slaying tomb. Tomorrow we must act separately from him. Yes. Nanny pouted in dissatisfaction. Big brother, why? Nanyu Xing glanced at her. What do you think? We're not here to play. He should help her find that thing as soon as possible and go home. Nanny was instantly discouraged. No matter how arrogant, domineering, and presumptuous she was, she knew how important this matter was. She couldn't be careless. Every time her big brother spoke in such a tone, she knew that she couldn't continue to make trouble. Got it. She lowered her eyes and pursed her lips. It didn't matter if she didn't see him. Anyway, she had already remembered that person's appearance. Although she couldn't see his appearance clearly, such a prideful person must be very famous. As long as she asked around, she wouldn't have to worry about not knowing his identity. Thinking of this, she suppressed the restlessness in her heart. Seeing that she was finally willing to listen, Nanyu Xing nodded in satisfaction. All right, it's already very late today. Everyone hurry up and rest. Boom. A loud roar suddenly sounded in the sky. The few of them immediately raised their heads to look. Dark clouds quickly gathered in the night sky, and the bright moon was quickly covered up. Then a bright, silver, snake-like Tianlei appeared behind the clouds. This instant of light was like a knife that ruthlessly tore through the dark night. Elder Bai Tong suddenly said, Look, that person seems to be preparing to refine an yuan item? The few of them looked over, and only then did they see that the white-clothed man they had just met had actually walked to a relatively spacious and flat area in the distance and stood there. Above his head was the place where Tianlei had appeared. There were piles of rocks here and the night was dark, so they didn't see him just now. Nanny was delighted at first, but then she looked at the elder in black and asked in confusion. "Elder Wu Peng, is he really going to refine a weapon?" Elder Wu Peng was a weapon refiner, so he naturally had more say in this. As expected, although Elder Wu Peng's expression was still cold, he still nodded. "I didn't expect him to be a weapon refiner. Elder Wu Peng, can you tell what level he is?" Nanny asked curiously. Elder Wu Peng looked up at the sky and pondered for a moment. "I can't be completely sure yet. However, this person's speed of triggering Tianlei is extremely fast. I think he should be quite capable." Nanny's eyes lit up. Rumble. Soon, the heavenly lightning in the sky rapidly gathered. After a while, countless Tianlei appeared in the sky, almost forming a sea of lightning. "This is at least a high-grade divine artifact, right?" Nanny asked curiously. Although she wasn't a weapon refiner, she had seen many weapon refinement scenes since she was young, so she was quite experienced. Elder Wu Ping nodded. "It's just refining a high-grade divine artifact. What's there to see?" Nanyu Xing was very unhappy to see Nanny's reaction and immediately pulled a long face. Nanny snorted. "There's nothing much to see, but he's a weapon refiner after all. Just this point alone makes you much stronger than me." He didn't look old either. A high-level weapon refiner in his 20s was considered pretty good in their family. At this moment, Elder Wu Peng suddenly took a step forward with a bewildered expression. Nanny asked curiously. "Elder Wu Peng, what's wrong?" Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 1628. As she looked, she turned back to look. She saw that the man in white had taken out a few stones that glowed with a faint golden light. Those stones were of the same size and shape, and they were arranged in a row. Upon closer inspection, she could even see that there seemed to be black veins inside. "That's..." Nanyu Xing was also shocked when he saw it clearly. "Ink gold spirit stones?" Elder Wu Ping nodded. The rest of them looked at each other. This thing was extremely precious. How could this man take out so many of them at once? Moreover, they were used to refine weapons. So many ink gold spirit stones. What kind of divine weapon is he refining? Nanyu Xing frowned slightly. He had only been suspicious before, but now he was basically certain that this man's identity was extraordinary. Elder Wu Ping did not say anything. His eyes were fixed on that spot. Perhaps influenced by the atmosphere, the rest of them fell silent at the same time. After placing the 8 ink gold spirit stones, Rong Xiu looked up at the sky. Tianlei was gathering and swimming wildly. The next moment he gently closed his eyes. There was a brief silence. Following that, countless bolts of lightning came crashing down from the sky. Boom boom boom. Tianlei came crashing down. They hit the ink gold spirit stones hard. Sparks flew everywhere. His figure was almost completely swallowed by the dazzling light. "He's not refining a high-grade divine weapon." Seeing this, Elder Wu Peng finally spoke in a deep voice. His tone was firm. "He's refining a king divine weapon." The rest of them did not say anything. Actually, even if he did not say anything, they could tell. How could refining a high-grade divine weapon cause such a commotion? It was rare for them to see such a young king divine weapon refiner. "He's quite capable." Nanyu Xing narrowed his eyes. "But why does he want to refine weapons here?" Refining a king divine weapon required a lot of time and energy. Even a king divine weapon refiner could not guarantee that he would succeed every time. Under normal circumstances, they would choose a quiet and safe place in advance and find someone to stand guard for them to ensure that they would not be disturbed before they officially began refining. One had to know that once the refining process was disturbed by external factors, the failure of refining was a small matter. If it caused a backlash to the refiner, it would be terrifying. But this man actually directly refined weapons outside of the Scarlet Soul Forest just like that. Was it because he was too ambitious, or did he have full confidence in himself? Arrogance. Nanyu Xing made a judgment in his heart. He had lived for so many years, and with his special status, he had seen many proud people. Even he himself was one of them. But the man in front of him was still more frivolous and arrogant than most people he had met. Even if the other party didn't say much to them from beginning to end. But he could still feel the arrogance in the other party's bones. This made him very unhappy. A weapon-refining king at this age should be quite famous in the Divine Ruins world. Why don't I have any impression of him? Nan Yuxing searched his mind for a while, but he still couldn't find the right person. Elder Wu Peng, can you guess this person's identity? Elder Wu Peng shook his head. Either the other party disguised his appearance, or, he's a newly advanced weapon refining king. He paused for a moment and hesitated a little. Actually, in his opinion, both of these situations were unlikely. What kind of person could disguise himself as such a talented and magnificent person? If an ordinary person wanted to disguise themselves, they would basically go in the direction of keeping a low profile. Who would do the opposite? Anyone who saw this appearance would never forget it. Then what was he after? As for the second guess, to a certain extent, it was even more ridiculous. He was a weapon refiner himself, so he could naturally see the other party's proficiency and ease. This was definitely not the strength and state that a newly advanced weapon refining king should have. There's another possibility: he concealed his true strength in the past. Only in this way can we explain many things that don't make sense. That's why he deliberately refined weapons here? Nan Yi came to a realization. There's basically no one here, so he specially chose this place. It's just that he definitely didn't expect to meet us. This was really a coincidence. The Scarlet Soul Forest actually circled around the God-slaying mound, but they just had to meet in this place. If this wasn't a coincidence, then what was? Hearing this, Nan Yuxing was slightly relieved. It seemed like this white-clothed man had indeed come here to find a convenient place to refine weapons. He didn't want to expose his identity, and they didn't want to interact with him. This way, both sides would mind their own business, which was not a bad thing. More importantly, it usually took a very long time to refine a king artifact. The shortest was a month and the longest was half a year. He had even heard of someone who spent a full 3 years just to refine a king divine weapon. This showed how troublesome this matter was. If this was the case, when they passed through the Scarlet Soul Forest and entered the God-slaying mound tomorrow, this man would probably still stay here. Then they wouldn't have to bother to separate from him. At this moment, another loud noise came from the sky. Several Tianlei appeared one after another. Nan Yuxing's expression changed slightly. Wasn't this person a little too fast to trigger the Tianlei? Enveloped by the light, Rong Xiu's eyes were still closed, and his expression didn't change. He raised his arms slightly, and his slender and fair fingers clenched into the air. The 8 black gold spirit stones started to fuse rapidly under the bombardment of the Tianlei. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from the Love Network. Chapter 1629. The incomparably hard ink gold spirit stone seemed to have become exceptionally soft in his hands, allowing him to mold it into any shape he wanted. When these ink gold spirit stones fused with each other, the faintly discernible black patterns inside also began to gradually connect with each other. A majestic aura was faintly emitted. How is his refining speed so fast? Elder Bai Tong also realized that something was wrong and hurriedly looked at Elder Wu Peng. It wasn't that they hadn't seen the scene of refining a king divine weapon before, but the current situation was truly beyond their expectations. Elder Wu Peng's brows were also furrowed. In fact, he had already noticed the abnormality just now, but he wasn't too sure. After all, even if he came personally, he might not be so fast. But now that the truth was right in front of him, he had to believe it even if he didn't want to. After a long silence, he said in a deep voice, "Even if it's a blacksmith of the same level, there will be a difference in strength due to the difference in talent and experience. Perhaps he has already tried many times before, which is why he can do it so easily today." A trace of doubt appeared on Elder Bai Tong's face. This isn't possible, right? What kind of background does he have to be able to take out so many ink gold spirit stones to practice? One had to know that if the refining failed, those materials would become a pile of trash. Elder Wu Peng pursed his lips. Of course he knew this too. But other than that, he really couldn't think of a better reason. He had seen many blacksmithing geniuses, but they definitely wouldn't be able to do this. This person is not simple. Nan Yuxing pondered for a long time and gave a vague answer. At first, he didn't take the other party seriously, but now that he looked at it again, he had to admit that this person was indeed capable. He just didn't know what this identity was. Nan Yi glanced at him and asked excitedly, "Big brother, why don't we ask him after he finishes refining? It's rare to see such a young blacksmith. If we can be on good terms with him, it'll be good for us too, right?" How could Nan Yuxing not know what she was thinking? He only glanced at her indifferently. "Don't worry about these things. The only thing you have to do now is to enter the God-slaying tomb and find that thing." Nan Yi pursed her lips. She had repeated this matter so many times that her ears were about to grow calluses. She snorted and looked in that direction again. Even though Zhang Xian didn't know the other party's identity, the fact that he was able to become a king of blacksmiths meant that the other party's clan couldn't be too weak. Moreover, he was such an outstanding person. As long as he inquired a little, he would definitely be able to obtain a lot of information. Father always said that she was too picky. But in this world, there was indeed such a perfect and flawless person. Nanny placed a hand on her chest and exhaled softly, trying to calm her emotions. However, his heart was beating uncontrollably as if it would jump out at any moment. Time passed slowly. The commotion from Tianlei's landing gradually died down. The 8 inky gold spirit stones in front of Rongxiu had completely fused, and he had forged a preliminary armor. Only the heart protection mirror in the middle was slightly sunken in. Rongxiu opened his eyes and, with a thought, transformed his origin power into a sharp flying knife. He held the flying knife in his hand and gently sliced it across his palm. Dark red blood instantly gushed out and dripped onto the heart protection mirror. In a short while, the sunken position was filled with his blood. Rongxiu put away the flying knife, and golden flames leaped in his palm. The remaining blood on his hand quickly dissipated, and even the wound quickly healed. In this short period of time, the blood that was contained in the heart protection mirror had gradually seeped into the entire armor. Traces of faint red color spread out in the golden armor, fusing with the black patterns and gradually covering them. From the outside, it looked like there were faint traces of blood in the sparkling and translucent golden jade. It exuded an indescribable nobility. When the last drop of blood spread out, the smell of blood completely dissipated. The crimson lines became the strange patterns that were engraved on the inside of the armor. Rongxiu's lips were slightly pale. However, his deep phoenix eyes became more and more focused. The light flickered and reflected in his eyes, dazzling. Is it going to end? Elder Bai Tong asked curiously as he raised his head to take a look. Tianlei didn't appear in the sky again. How long has it been? It shouldn't be, right? Maybe it failed. Nan Yuxing said. It wasn't as if such a situation had never happened before. He was already used to it. He was so eager to trigger Tianlei just now, so now it should be, kaboom. Before he could finish his sentence, he heard another loud bang coming from the sky. The sound was even louder than before. Then, behind the thick clouds, several more Tianlei appeared one after another. Nan Yuxing's face was a little ugly. In the next moment, those Tianlei fell again. Sparks flew everywhere. They could barely see the silhouette of the figure. Elder Wu Peng's eyes darkened. He might be able to succeed before dawn. The remaining 3 people were shocked when they heard this. But even Elder Wu Peng said so. Then Nan Yuxing slowly clenched his fists. The other party was in such a hurry. Could it be that he also planned to enter the god-slaying mound tomorrow? Rongxiu began to forge and carve more carefully on the armor. He spent 120% of his energy on every inch and every part to make it perfect. The night gradually faded away. When the sky started to brighten, he finally stopped what he was doing. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1630. Tianlei had completely fallen, and the dark clouds had dispersed. The flames around him also dissipated bit by bit. Only the armor in front of him was left shining brightly. Although the armor was enveloped by a ball of light, outsiders couldn't see it clearly. However, that vast and powerful aura was impossible to ignore. Elder Wu Peng and the others fell into a dead silence. They all knew very well that it was indeed a King Divine weapon. This man actually, really only used one day. No. In just one night he had crafted an Emperor artifact. Although they were already mentally prepared, when they really witnessed everything with their own eyes, the shock in their hearts was still indescribable. Rongxiu waved his wrist lightly, and that ball of light fell into his hand and disappeared. At this moment, the sky was about to brighten, and the surroundings were shrouded in a faint layer of fog, making it hazy. Dressed in white, he stood in the misty fog, looking even more like an immortal, elegant and outstanding. Nanny was a little stunned. At this moment he suddenly turned around and walked over. His footsteps were light and calm, but every step seemed to be stepping on Nanny's heart. Nanny subconsciously held her breath, and her entire body tensed up. His heart thumped wildly and his face seemed to be on fire. She had never thought that a man who she couldn't even see clearly could control her emotions so easily. The distance between them was getting closer and closer. Nan Yuxing looked at Nanny and saw her staring blankly ahead. He wanted to speak. However, when the words were about to come out of his mouth, he suddenly couldn't say it. He had never seen his sister reveal such an expression for anyone before. Although he was usually a little strict with her, he still doted on her in his heart. She really liked him. As long as the other party had a decent background, such good looks and talent as a weapon refiner, she might consider him. At the thought of this, he took a step forward and cupped his hands politely. "Sir, please wait." Rong Xiu didn't stop as if he didn't hear him at all. Nan Yuxing frowned. This man did have the right to be arrogant. But it wouldn't be good if he went overboard. He took a few steps forward and blocked Rong Xiu's path. Rong Xiu then stopped, looked up and glanced at the other man. Nan Yuxing's heart skipped a beat. This man's eyes were deep and serene, like a bottomless cold lake. And this gaze was extremely cold and indifferent. It was as if the person standing in front of him was not a living person, but an insignificant object. This gaze made Nan Yuxing very uncomfortable. However, he was no longer a greenhorn, so he could still control his emotions. The smile on his face did not change. "Your Excellency, please don't misunderstand. We have no ill intentions. I am Nan Yuxing. Seeing that you are already a king of blacksmiths at such a young age, I am very impressed. I wonder if we can be friends? In the future?" "No need." Before he could finish, Rong Xiu had already given him a straightforward answer. After saying that, Rong Xiu took a step, bypassed him and continued to move forward. Nan Yuxing was still in a daze. It was rare for him to take the initiative to build a relationship with someone, but he was rejected? Usually, countless people wanted to talk to him and make friends with him, but they might not have the chance. This man he was so angry that he laughed and turned around. "You are so arrogant." Although he was laughing, the sarcasm in his words couldn't be clearer. Rong Xiu didn't even stop in his tracks. Nan Yuxing finally couldn't maintain his expression. Before he could flare up, Nan Yi had already rushed forward. "Yo, wait." She jogged over and quickly rushed in front of Rong Xiu. A change finally appeared in Rong Xiu's indifferent expression. His brows furrowed slightly, and a hint of impatience appeared between his brows. Nan Yi looked up and saw his face. For a moment, her mind was almost blank. Previously, she hadn't been able to see his face clearly, but now that they were only a few steps apart, she could see him clearly. His sharp eyebrows reached his temples, his phoenix-like eyes were as deep as the sea, his nose bridge was high, and his crimson lips were like the first color of spring. It was clearly an extremely cold and distant face, but there was a hint of spring in it. For a moment he was as cold as a fairy, but in the blink of an eye, he was as charming as a demon. He could really be called a peerless beauty in the world. Suddenly, the words that Nan Yi had prepared were stuck in her throat and she couldn't say them. This face had such a huge impact on her that she didn't notice the impatience in Rong Xiu's eyes. "Move aside." Rong Xiu spoke. His voice was as cold as ice, but it also had a noble aura that couldn't be disobeyed. Almost instinctively, Nan Yi took a step to the side. Seeing this scene, Nan Yuxing was furious. His sister had always been fearless. Their entire family treated her like the apple of their eye, afraid that she would be aggrieved if they bumped into her. In the end, not only did this man not give her any face, he even directly ordered her to move aside. Nan Yuxing's figure flashed. In the blink of an eye, he appeared beside Nan Yi. He pulled Nan Yi behind him and took a step forward with a sneer. "Is the king of weapon refinement really so amazing? We are kind enough to befriend you, why do you have to be so high and mighty?" He had only given Yi some face because she liked him. Unfortunately, the other party didn't seem to appreciate it. Refusing a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. Rong Xiu didn't have any patience for outsiders, let alone these people who had once wanted to find trouble with him. He finally looked straight at Nan Yuxing. At this moment, Nan Yuxing suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. Rong Xiu's expression was languid, and his voice was extremely indifferent. "You've delayed my visit to my wife." Every word and sentence was filled with chilling intent. Digression. Has everyone seen the news of the change in monthly votes? To put it simply, you will have to spend more Xiaoxiang dollars to get a monthly vote in the future. Moreover, each person can only give a maximum of 5 monthly votes to a book every month. There is also a limit to the number of votes per day. Non-top scorers are allowed 2 votes per day, and top scorers are allowed 5 votes per day. But the limit is 5 votes per month. If you have monthly votes, please vote as soon as possible. The change will be official in 3 days. You won't be able to bury February with a handful of monthly votes anymore. The star of monthly votes will also be changed to the star of reviews. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 1631. A coldness surged from the bottom of his heart, causing Nan Yuxing to feel cold all over. However, Nan Yi's attention was on a certain word. Madam? You was already married? Nan Yi's heart instantly turned cold, as if a basin of cold water had been poured over her head. Rong Xiu. At this moment, a clear female voice sounded from behind. Nan Yuxing and Nan Yi saw the man who had spoken coldly and mercilessly to them just a moment ago, looking straight ahead. In an instant, the frost in his eyes melted rapidly. What replaced it was an unconcealable gentleness and gentleness. His scarlet lips curved slightly, and there seemed to be a stream of light flickering in his deep phoenix eyes. The aura around him also became completely different. You're awake? As he spoke, he directly walked past the brother and sister and walked over. A faint cold fragrance swept past her nose. Nan Yi turned around in a daze and looked in the direction he had gone. Not far away behind a few stones stood a woman. That woman was dressed in a red dress and looked to be only 17 or 18 years old. Her skin was as fair as snow. Her eyebrows were like distant mountains, and her eyes were as bright as the stars. She was only dressed in a simple red dress, and her black hair was simply tied up. There were no extra accessories on her body, and as she stood there, she seemed to be more beautiful than a myriad of magnificent scenes. There was a smile on her lips, but her entire body was enveloped in an incomparably noble aura, revealing a noble aura from her bones. In this misty white fog, she appeared especially beautiful and devastatingly beautiful. The moment she saw the other party's face clearly, Nan Yi was stunned at first, then she couldn't help but feel sour and jealous in her heart. She had always flaunted her beauty, but in front of this woman, it was the first time she felt ashamed of her inferiority. Even if she didn't want to admit it, she knew very well that the other party's beauty was indeed much better than hers. Nan Yi couldn't help but look down at herself. Her clothes were luxurious and she was particular about everything. But at this moment, in contrast to the other party, she started to feel that her outfit was very cumbersome. Even when she lowered her head, the jingling, dangling hair ornament on her head made her feel vexed. She was dressed up so exquisitely, but it was not as moving as the other party's bare face. Any woman would feel uncomfortable. Rong Xiu had already walked over and tucked the strands of hair by her cheek behind her ear. His movements were skillful and natural. He looked at the person in front of him, his voice low and pleasant. Did you rest well? Did I disturb you? Chu Liwei shook his head and smiled. No. Actually, I woke up when you were refining just now. Rong Xiu frowned slightly and glanced at Sheng Guanjing behind him. Sheng Guanjing shrugged helplessly. With such a huge commotion, even a barrier wouldn't be able to stop it. Originally, before Rong Xiu prepared to refine, he was worried that he would disturb her rest, so he specially set up a layer of enchantment. But from the looks of it now, it should be useless. She had always been sensitive to these things, so it was impossible for her not to have noticed it. Rong Xiu raised his eyebrows slightly, and a smile appeared in his eyes. He took out a ball of light and handed it over. Take a look. Chu Liwei took the item and a hint of surprise flashed across her eyes. She knew that Rong Xiu was extremely talented in refining weapons. It wasn't that the two of them had never competed in this aspect before. But she basically lost. Moreover, she had never tested Rong Xiu's true strength. This was the first time she had seen Rong Xiu refine an Emperor Divine weapon with her own eyes. Others might not be able to see it clearly, but this thing was in her hands now so she could see it clearly. It was a suit of armor. The entire body was a faint golden color, but the texture looked more like jade, but it was extremely light in the hand. You can drip blood directly to recognize it as your master. Rong Xiu said. Chu Liwei nodded slightly, took out a dagger and cut her palm. Dark red blood immediately gushed out. It dripped on the armor. The armor flickered with light, and the blood was quickly swallowed and absorbed, disappearing on the surface of the armor. Extremely thin blood-colored patterns appeared inside. In an instant, Chu Liwei sensed that there seemed to be some kind of connection between her and the armor. After that, with a flash of light, the armor quickly disappeared. Chu Liwei blinked. The wound on her hand quickly healed, leaving only a faint pink scar. A faint layer of golden light enveloped Chu Liwei's body, but it quickly disappeared. But she knew very well that the armor had already recognized her as its master. Then, she seemed to have sensed something, and her eyes widened slightly as she looked at Rong Xiu. Do you like it? Rong Xiu asked with a smile. Chu Liu's words were suddenly stuck in her throat. After a moment, she nodded seriously. I like everything you give me. The scene of the two talking and laughing as if there was no one else around deeply provoked Nan Yi. She couldn't help but take a step forward. You gave her the king divine weapon that you worked so hard to refine so easily? A cold glint flashed across Rongshio's eyes. Chu Luiyue blinked and looked at the other party for the first time. In fact, she had seen and heard the scene of the siblings blocking Rongshio just now. It was obvious that this woman had taken a fancy to Rongshio. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been so unforgiving. And you? Do you know how much effort he put in to refine this? You actually accepted it with a clear conscience? As if sensing Chu Luiyue's gaze, Nanyi directly aimed the cannon at Chu Luiyue. No matter what, that was a king divine weapon. She gave it away so easily. Looking at Nanyi's agitated and resentful appearance, Chu Luiyue was a little amused. She raised her brows and was about to speak, but Rongshio had already turned around. Firstly, this is a divine weapon that I refined. It's my business how I want to deal with it. Since when is it your turn to interfere? Nanyi shuddered from his cold gaze and her rebuttal became softer. But, secondly, this is a gift that I specially prepared for Madam. If I don't give it to her, do I have to give it to you? Rongshio enunciated every word, and his face seemed to be covered with a layer of frost. Being stared at by his intimidating gaze, Nanyi finally sensed a trace of danger. She opened her mouth but didn't say anything. Nanyu Xing was angry and heartbroken. He immediately stepped forward and stared at her warningly before pulling her behind him. His sister was used to being arrogant and spoke as she pleased. Even he felt embarrassed when he heard what she said just now. But this was his sister after all. How could he let her be bullied when she was outside? Nanyu Xing took a deep breath. My sister didn't mean that. You. Rongshio didn't have any patience with the siblings and directly interrupted him. He stared coldly at Nanyi. Thirdly, who do you think you are? How dare you criticize my wife? Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 1632. The last sentence successfully caused the expressions of the siblings to change. Nanyu Xing was both shocked and furious. He was shocked because he didn't expect the other party to be so impudent. He was angry because that man had actually said such humiliating and contemptuous words to his sister. Nanny's eyes widened in disbelief. She had been pampered and spoiled since she was young. Not to mention insults, she had never even heard a harsh word from anyone. Now that she was suddenly pointed at and scolded, she naturally took a long time to regain her senses. After she regained her senses, her face quickly flushed red. Something seemed to be surging crazily in her chest and was about to burst out from her chest. You, she wanted to refute, but even her voice was trembling. Because her emotions were very complicated at this moment. It was the first time she liked someone, but she didn't expect the other party to say such words before she could express her feelings. The impact was so great that she didn't even have time to be angry. She was completely stunned. Nanyu Xing hurriedly turned around to look at her. When he saw her expression, his heart ached. When had his precious sister ever suffered such grievances? Sir, aren't you going overboard with your words? Nanyu Xing raised his voice, and the aura around him began to surge. He only said a few words casually, but you're so rude. Is bullying a woman like this something a man should do? Rongshio's brows moved slightly. She said all those things and she deserves it. Instead of criticizing others here, why don't you go back and think about how to change your precious sister's bad habit of speaking without thinking? The other party had offended him time and time again, and he was already impatient with them. If it weren't for the fact that he still had to refine this armor, he would have already been rude to them yesterday. Nanyu Xing was so angry that smoke was coming out of his 7 orifices. It had been a long time since he met such an arrogant and impudent person. Yes, such a young king of weapon refinement was indeed outstanding. But this didn't mean that they were afraid of him. Looks like you don't intend to apologize? He asked gloomily. In his words, there was already an unconcealable murderous intent surging. When Nanyi saw this, she hurriedly went forward and grabbed his arm. Brother, what are you doing? Nanyu Xing frowned. He humiliated you, so I naturally planned to teach him a lesson and help you vent your anger. Of course Nanyi knew what he meant. In the past she had often asked Big Brother for help. But it was different this time. If Big Brother beat him up, then wouldn't the other party really see her as an enemy? She was angry, aggrieved, and furious. However, he didn't want to completely fall out with the other party because of this. Big Brother had always been ruthless. If he killed or crippled someone, it's not his fault. Why did you hit him? Nanyi bit her lip and looked at Chu Luiyue with resentment. The look in his eyes was very clear. If there was someone to blame, it should be her. If it wasn't for protecting her, he definitely wouldn't have done this. Chu Luiyue? She hadn't even said a single word from the start to the end, and this hat was actually placed on her head? How could Nan Yuxing not know what his sister was thinking? It was nothing more than reluctance. Nan Yuxing really expected better from her. His words were already so harsh and his attitude was so clear, but she still refused to come to her senses. At this time she was still speaking up for him? What the hell? He originally wanted Nanyi to step back and make a move himself. However, Nanyi hugged his arm tightly and refused to let go. Nan Yuxing was angry and frustrated. In the end, he could only grit his teeth and hit Nanyi's head hard. You. In the past, he only thought that she was a little delicate and willful, but he didn't know that she could go to such an extent for a man. He was really disappointed. The atmosphere between the siblings fell into a stalemate. Eldest young master, 2nd Mississippi. It's daybreak and the poisonous gas in the Scarlet Soul Forest has dissipated. It's time to go in. Elder Wu Peng spoke at the right time to break the stalemate. Elder Bai Tong also hurriedly acted as a peacemaker. Yes. The time it takes to pass through the Scarlet Soul Forest is very short. Young master, miss, we have to hurry. The two of them said this to give them a way out. Nan Yuxing grabbed Nanyi's wrist and headed in the direction of the Scarlet Soul Forest. Let's go. They were here because they had something important to do. As for that man who didn't know what was good for him, when everything was over, they would think of a way to deal with him. Nanyi's wrist hurt from being grabbed and she frowned. However, she knew that her elder brother was angry at this moment and didn't dare to say anything. She could only follow them. The two elders also followed one after the other. When the two sides brushed past each other, Elder Wu Peng gave Rong Xiu a meaningful look. Rong Xiu's expression was indifferent and calm, as if he didn't take them seriously at all. Chu Luiyue blinked and looked at the few people's back view. Rong Xiu was considered famous in the Divine Ruins world and many big shots had seen him before. These two people seemed to be of high status, but they didn't seem to know Rong Xiu. What are you thinking about? Rong Xiu's voice sounded. Chu Luiyue looked back thoughtfully. Nothing, I just feel that their background doesn't seem simple. The four of them concealed their auras very well, but her intuition told her that they shouldn't be weak. More importantly, they had witnessed Rong Xiu refining a king divine weapon with their own eyes, but they didn't seem to be very shocked. One had to know that the people from the major sects and families had directly fallen out with Lingxiao College in order to fight for the Scarlet Heaven Sword in Blue Feather's Abyss. At that time, they had thought that the Scarlet Heaven Sword was a king divine weapon. It could be seen how important and noble a king divine weapon was to these people, so much so that they would pay a huge price to fight for it. But these people, from the beginning to the end, they didn't seem to covet the king divine weapon at all. In this situation, they either knew that they couldn't win so they didn't even have any thoughts about it, or this thing wasn't that precious to them. Judging from their arrogant attitude, it shouldn't be the first case. But if it was the second case, then it would be interesting. Chu Luiyue had been in the Divine Ruins world for a long time and knew that king divine weapons were extremely precious to many families, even first-rate families. What kind of background did these people have? They were actually like this. That black-clothed old man should be a weapon refining supremacy. Sheng Guanjing retracted his gaze and muttered. Just now he had been staying behind a few stones, and the conflict had been between Rong Xiu and Chu Luiyue, so those people didn't pay much attention to him. A weapon refining supremacy is the follower of those two? Chu Luiyue raised her eyebrows slightly. Interesting. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from the Love Network. Chapter 1633. She stretched out her finger and gently tapped Rong Xiu's chest. She smiled mischievously. Rong Xiu, maybe she really is a young lady from a certain family and has an extraordinary background. Even a girl like her fell in love with you at first sight. It's clear that you're still as powerful as before. Back then, Rong Xiu was still a young man. He was still a bit immature, but he was already the dream boy of countless girls. On the first day he entered Lingxiao College, he attracted the attention of almost half of the girls in the college. Now that a few years had passed, he had grown from a young man to a man. His appearance was enchanting and his temperament was noble. Even Chu Luiyue couldn't help but sigh in her heart. This man's every movement was even more magnificent than before. Rong Xiu glanced at her indifferently, grabbed her hand and suddenly moved closer. The two breathed together and they could almost feel each other's hot breath. A cold fragrance lingered around them, adding to the charm and gentleness. The two clearly didn't move closer. Being stared at by Rong Xiu's bottomless eyes and enveloped by his aura, Chu Luiyue inexplicably felt her face heat up. His movements were very restrained and polite. Only she knew how unbridled and aggressive his gaze was at this moment. Chu Liyue's heart suddenly skipped a beat. His gaze was so intense that it almost forced her to subconsciously turn her face away. "Do you smell something?" Rongxiu suddenly asked. His voice had always been deep and pleasant. At this moment the two of them were very close. He deliberately lowered his voice so it was more like he was whispering into her ear. Chu Liyue felt as if she was even hotter. "What's that smell?" Rongxiu raised his eyebrows. "It's so sour." Chu Liyue suddenly came back to her senses. She glared at him angrily, then pushed him away. She snorted and turned to leave. A certain someone was really getting more and more arrogant. Rongxiu was pushed away, but he was not angry. He only laughed. Chu Liyue instantly quickened his pace. Only then did Rongxiu lift his feet and follow him unhurriedly. Do you really not smell it?" Chu Liyue pretended not to hear anything. Sheng Wanjing looked at the sky speechlessly. He smelled the sour stench of love. Soon, Nan Yuxing and the others arrived at the Scarlet Soul Forest. Just as he was about to enter, he heard footsteps behind him. Nan Yuxing turned around and frowned. Why are they here? He felt even more disgusted and couldn't help but sneer. You were so arrogant just now, why are you chasing after me now? I'm telling you in advance that we won't pursue the matter from before for the sake of my little sister. But if you continue to pester us, don't blame us for being impolite. Chu Liyue looked at him strangely. Young master, are you misunderstanding something? We're just going to pass through the Red Soul Forest and enter the God-slaying tomb. We're not in the mood to continue arguing with you. Nan Yuxing's face turned ugly. That man's words were extremely unpleasant, but he didn't expect this woman to be the same. She had a sharp tongue and didn't know what was good for her. He clenched his fists and his voice was even colder. You're going in too? The God-slaying tomb is extremely dangerous. Why are you going there for no reason? He had thought that they had specially come to this deserted place to refine Emperor Divine weapons, but now it seemed that it wasn't the case. Chu Liyue almost laughed out loud. Are the Red Soul Forest and the God-slaying tomb your territory? Only you can enter and others can't? Isn't this too unreasonable? Nan Yuxing was speechless. He was indeed in no position to stop the fun here. But Nan Yi suddenly crossed her arms and sneered. Of course it's because there's something wrong with you. We were about to pass through the Red Soul Forest and enter the God-slaying tomb, but you followed us. The God-slaying tomb is vast and there are countless places to enter. Why did we meet you here? Isn't this too much of a coincidence? As long as she wasn't fighting with Rongxiu, her combat strength wasn't weak. Moreover, she had already regarded Chu Liyue as her enemy in her heart. When they spoke, it was naturally tit for tat. Oh, so that's how it is. It does sound reasonable. Chu Liyue nodded as if she agreed with him and changed the topic. But it seems that we were here first. If there's a problem, it should be you, right? Nanny was stunned. You, she wanted to say something, but suddenly remembered that the other party seemed to have been here before they came. It didn't feel good to be in the wrong when they were in the right. Nan Yuxing also frowned. So, it was really just a coincidence? Even so, we have to go in from here now. Go somewhere else and don't go with us. His tone was very hard, as if he was ordering someone. Chu Liyue felt that it was even more interesting. These two siblings seemed to have a screw loose in their heads. She didn't know if it was because they had been in a superior position for a long time and were used to ordering people around, but every word they said could successfully disgust her. Do you usually control the world like this? Chu Liyue couldn't suppress the curiosity in her heart and asked sincerely. Nan Yuxing and the others were embarrassed. So, you don't want to do as I say? Nan Yuxing's voice seemed to carry a hint of threat. Chu Liyue smiled and her eyes curved. She stretched out her hand and pointed at Nanny, saying very sincerely, Speaking of pestering, isn't it your precious sister who has been pestering my husband? I think the ones who should take the initiative to leave are you, right? Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 1634. Tuanzi buried its head in her shoulder and rubbed against her. Then it reluctantly let go of her hand. Then you will miss me every day. Chu Liyue kissed her face. Dumpling jumped down from her arms, snorted at Yu Qian and turned to leave. Yu Qian looked at Ruan Jianfeng. Go and arrange her residence. Yes. In fact, this matter should have been handled by Jin Yunlai. But because of Mu Yafeng's matter, almost all of his authority had been taken away. Even such a matter was handed over to the fifth divine emissary. Chu Liyue watched Dumpling leave. Yu Qian was obviously worried about her. He had been following behind her, as if he wanted to personally send her back to Feng Ming Mountain. Chu Luiyue raised her eyes slightly. The light barrier between the illusory god palace and Feng Ming Mountain fell from the sky, flickering with a faint glow. She had always thought that this barrier couldn't be passed, but now it seemed that it didn't cause any obstruction to Dumpling. This was much more convenient. Shangguanyu, come with me. She put away her thoughts and smiled at Ruan Jianfeng. Sorry to trouble you, fifth divine emissary. Ruan Jianfeng didn't say anything and walked in a certain direction. Chu Luiyue immediately followed. When he passed by Jin Yunlai, he suddenly said, "Wait." Chu Luiyue stopped in her tracks and turned to look at him. Seventh divine emissary? I have a question for you. Jin Yunlai said, staring at her eyes as if trying to see something from them. The last Shin formation wasn't included in the mythical flame diagram. How did you crack it? This last Shin formation was undoubtedly the most difficult one on the entire star path. Even he had spent a lot of time and energy to barely crack it back then. Even after that, he had spent several years and tried countless times before he finally managed to successfully unleash it. But what about Chu Luiyue? She had only been in the illusory god palace for a few months. From the heaven gate to the illusory god palace, she had deciphered the countless profound formations on this star road one by one. Even though she had seen some of them before, such efficiency was simply too shocking. Or even illusory. Jin Yunlai asked himself. Even now, he might not be able to cast the last Shen formation as quickly and smoothly as her. Chu Luiyue looked at him with clear eyes and a sincere expression. Is that very difficult? Jin Yunlai choked. For a moment he felt that Chu Luiyue was mocking him. But in the next moment, Chu Luiyue laughed. That profound formation indeed did not appear on the mythical flame diagram because there was no need for it to be included. That Shen formation looked complicated, but in fact, it was just a collection of the Shen formations from before on the Star Road. Since the previous ones could be broken, how difficult would the last one be? Jin Yunlai's heart skipped a beat, and his entire body froze on the spot. Chu Luiyue's lips curved slightly. Without another word, she turned and followed Ruan Jianfeng. Patriarch Nan, let's meet another day. The flesh on Nan Jinshu's face trembled violently. At this moment, Chu Luiyue suddenly felt someone's gaze on her. She paused in her steps and looked up. In the distance, in front of the main hall of the illusory god palace, a person was standing with his hands behind his back, looking at her from afar. Jun Jiuqing. When did he come? Most importantly, he seemed to have come from the main hall. However, Jun Jiuqing's expression was different from before. In the past, he always had a smile on his lips, but now, his face was calm and expressionless. He seemed to be looking at her, but his eyes seemed to be unfocused. In short, it felt a little strange. Su Li followed her line of sight and explained softly, Jun Jiuqing entered the main hall of the illusory god palace some time ago, but no one knows what he went there for. They didn't even know why Jun Jiuqing was qualified to enter the main hall. Chu Luiyue nodded and retracted her gaze. It seemed that although Jun Jiuqing and Nan Jinshu both had special privileges, Jun Jiuqing was still better. She just didn't know, where did their special privileges come from? In the dark and cramped cell, Dugu Mabao slowly opened his eyes. In the end, this day had still come. Although that person unilaterally tore the contract and caused the time to be brought forward, she didn't disappoint him. Everything that happened before wasn't wasted. In another cell, Lan Xiao was sitting on the ground with one leg bent and leaning against the wall. The air was filled with the faint smell of blood. He lowered his head to take a look. The wound on his arm was already gradually healing. After all, it was a divine body tempered by the golden Tianlei, so it naturally wouldn't be damaged so easily. His recovery ability after injury was also quite good. Looks like it's really soon. He touched his chin and chuckled softly. This chuckle affected the wound at the corner of his mouth, causing him to hiss in pain. He licked his lips and leaned his head slightly against the wall. Although it was dark all around and almost nothing could be seen, there was still a faint glow in his eyes. Chu Luiyue and Su Li followed Ruan Jianfeng all the way. Along the way, Su Li would explain to her in a low voice from time to time. She had been here for quite some time and was quite familiar with it. Chu Luiyue listened as she walked. Suddenly, she stopped and looked in a certain direction. Where is that? Su Li followed her line of sight. That's the residence of the seventh oracle. Chu Luiyue shook her head. No, I'm talking about the courtyard at the back. Su Li was stunned. Ruan Jianfeng suddenly turned around and looked at her. How do you know there's another courtyard there? Chapter 1635. She had too many advantages like a dazzling pearl. He only wanted to hold her in his hands and monopolize her. Of course, he knew that this was just wishful thinking, because she deserved a wider world and a more prosperous scenery. Then he could only choose one and say it more obviously. As long as she stood here, she had already won. Why should he waste any more effort? Chu Liyue's eyes flickered when she heard that. She had to admit that when this man said such words, it was always easier to move her heart. Cough. Sheng Guanjing, who had been ignored and never paid attention to, coughed hard. He began to feel that it was a mistake for him to follow them. It was clear that the two of them didn't do anything. They only looked at each other a few times and talked to each other. Today's waist hug was the most intimate action between the two of them during this period of time. It could be said that he had restrained himself to the extreme. However, Sheng Guanjing still felt that he was very, very redundant. What a miscalculation. Rong Xiu and Chu Liyue looked over at the same time. At the same time, Rong Xiu's fingertips gently rubbed her back twice, then he tactfully retracted his hand. Chu Liyue, she gave Rong Xiu a warning look. Control yourself. Rong Xiu raised his eyebrows. Am I not restrained enough? Chu Liyue, Sheng Guanjing looked up at the sky. Akaf, I think it's about time. Can we prepare to enter the Scarlet Soul Forest? The weather was clear and there were no clouds in the sky. The Scarlet Soul Forest, which looked especially eerie in the darkness last night, looked much more normal now. Black trees stood tall. Occasionally, thick roots would be revealed and they were also completely black. The red leaves swayed in the wind, like a scene at the end of autumn that was about to wither. However, the strange thing was that there were no leaves on the ground in the forest. Not a single one. In a normal forest there would be a thick layer of fallen leaves, but here it was flat and clean. Looking at it like this, it was inevitable that one would find it strange. Let's go. After Sheng Guanjing finished speaking, he took the lead and entered. Chu Liyue glanced at the swaying red leaves. He narrowed his eyes and walked in. Sheng Guanjing took the lead, followed by Chu Liyue. Rong Xiu was one step behind her and was at the end of the line. The soil on the ground was reddish-brown and very soft. Stepping on it would not make any sound. The forest was very quiet. Other than the rustling of the leaves in the wind, there was no other sound. They could even hear each other's breathing. In the Scarlet Soul Forest, one cannot use origin power, nor can one fly. One can only walk forward step by step. As Sheng Guanjing walked, he patiently explained some things to pay attention to. Although it's a lot slower, it's safer. To walk through the Scarlet Soul Forest, it would take about 4 hours. We should be able to leave this place before the poison gas spreads again. Chu Liyue listened from the back and responded obediently. Then he couldn't help but ask, Taizu, you've been to the God-slaying tomb before. Why, have I never heard you mention it? The point was that he seemed to know this place better than others. What had he experienced here in the past? Taizu pondered for a while before he spoke again. In fact, there's nothing I can't say. It's just that the last time I came here, I didn't have a good memory, so I didn't mention it to you. No one was willing to take the initiative to recall and mention those unhappy memories. This time, if Chu Liyue had not been forced here by the other party, he would not have mentioned it. Chu Liyue frowned slightly. She had never seen Taizu like this. Should be. What happened here really made it hard for him to let go. Taizu, if you don't want to say it, actually, Sheng Guanjing waved his hand and suddenly laughed. It's nothing. It's been so many years. He paused for a while before he continued. That year, before I went to the northern region of Untainted Land, the last place I stayed was the God-slaying tomb. Chu Liyue was a bit shocked. Didn't this mean that Taizu went to the northern region of Untainted Land from here? But these two places were famous for being dangerous in the world of divine ruins. Why did he? When I came to the world of divine ruins, I didn't belong to any sect, but I was arrogant. After I defeated 7 weapon refining supremacies, I became even more famous and attracted many people to follow me, but also caused a lot of hatred. Since I had already established the heavenly order, I naturally didn't want to establish a sect here. I wanted to be alone, so I rejected all the followers. But I met a friend and we had a good chat. He wasn't a weapon refining master, just an ordinary martial artist with average talent. He stayed at the high god level for many years and still couldn't break through. But he was open-minded and I admired him. I heard that he was also a person outside the world of divine ruins and came here alone, so I appreciated him and treated him as a close friend. Later, he heard that there was a supreme treasure in the god-slaying tomb that could help him break through to the god level, so he was a bit eager to try. I heard that this place was dangerous, so I decided to come with him. If I could help him break through to the god level, I would be able to get rid of a knot in his heart. Hearing this, Chu Liyue had already guessed something. Sure enough, Taizu heaved a long sigh. Unfortunately, I treated him like a close friend, but he was just using me. After we came here, we went through a lot of difficulties and finally found that thing. But whoosh! Suddenly, a gust of wind blew. In the Crimson Soul Forest, a mournful whimper sounded from afar. Digression. See you tomorrow, mobile users. Please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1636. Chu Liyue's heart tightened. He looked up at the forest but found that the sound seemed to be coming from all directions, and he couldn't tell where it was coming from. Sheng Guanjing frowned and said, "Don't worry. Those are just vengeful spirits in the Scarlet Soul Forest." Vengeful spirits? That's right. The so-called vengeful spirits are the souls of those cultivators who wanted to pass through the Scarlet Soul Forest and enter the god-slaying tomb. Because they were trapped here, they are full of resentment. However, these souls don't have their own will and consciousness. As long as we don't use force, we won't be discovered by them and can pass through safely. Chu Liyue nodded thoughtfully. I see. The whimpering sound was mournful and miserable, as if it was right beside them. When the sound clearly fell into their ears, they couldn't help but feel a chill in their hearts. It wasn't hard to imagine how miserable and pitiful these people were when they died in the Scarlet Soul Forest. Fortunately, the three of them were mentally strong and weren't disturbed by the whimpering sound. They continued forward. However, after being disturbed by the sound, Sheng Guanjing didn't continue speaking. Chu Liyue didn't ask any more questions. Taizu had always been free and easy. Chu Liyue could see that the incident back then had a deep impact on him. So much so that today, 1,000 years later, he still didn't want to mention it. He probably hadn't completely let it go. In fact, it was understandable if he thought about it carefully. At that time, Taizu was alone in the Divine Ruins world and only regarded this person as a friend. It was almost a trust that he could entrust his life to. However, the other party betrayed him for a treasure. No matter who it was, they wouldn't feel good about such a thing. However, Chu Liyue still had a small question in his heart. At that time, Taizu was already a venerable artificer. This status was much higher than that of the venerable god and the doctor of the same level. Then, why did that person choose to betray Taizu and kill Taizu just for a treasure that could help a cultivator break through from the high god to the venerable god? On one hand, Taizu had no interest in this thing. On the other hand, even if he obtained the treasure and successfully became a god, he would still be slightly inferior to Taizu. Why did he have to be so decisive? However, since Taizu did not continue, Chu Liyue did not ask further. For Taizu, every time he mentioned it, it was a process of tearing open the scars of his wounds. She pursed her lips and lowered her eyes. Suppressing the doubts and emotions in her heart, she continued to move forward with Taizu. There were a few times when Chu Liyue's ears hurt from the sobbing. She even felt that someone was standing beside her, ready to kill her at any time. But in the end, she controlled herself and ignored it, burying her head in the front. After walking for an unknown period of time, the mournful and shrill sobbing sound finally subsided. Chu Liyue heaved a sigh of relief. The sound was endless and did not dissipate for a long time. No one knew how many people had died here, and no one knew how many skeletons were buried under this seemingly flat and clean ground. A gust of wind blew and the leaves rustled. Chu Liyue looked up. On the black trees, countless red leaves swayed in the wind. As she got closer, she could clearly see the veins on one of the leaves. They were not the veins of a normal leaf, but the shape of a human bone. A gust of cold air surged up from the soles of her feet. Chu Liyue calmly withdrew her gaze, but the scene of the leaves swaying in the wind like bloody palms last night appeared in her mind. So, the Red Soul Forest was not even within the range of the god-slaying mound, but it was already so terrifying and dangerous. What kind of danger awaited them when they entered the god-slaying mound? We're almost out of here. At this moment, Taizu's words interrupted Chu Liyue's thoughts. She looked up in the direction of the voice and found that the edge of the forest was faintly visible. In about half an hour they should be able to get out. Chu Liyue did not dare to let down her guard. She followed Taizu even more cautiously. As long as they could, a sharp scream suddenly broke the silence in the forest. Chu Liyue's heart skipped a beat. This was not the voice of a vengeful spirit, but of a human, and it sounded familiar. Chu Liyue and the rest turned their heads and looked in the direction of the voice. Then they saw a few familiar figures. It was Nan Yuxing and the rest. They seemed to have encountered some danger and were running towards them quickly. As they ran, they would turn their heads from time to time, as if they were afraid that something would catch up with them. Taizu could not help but curse. At this time they were about to successfully leave this place, but trouble came looking for them again. "Let's go," Taizu immediately shouted. He grabbed Chu Liyue's wrist and quickly headed out of the forest. Rong Xiu also quickly caught up and followed behind the two of them. "Wait, you guys." Nan Yuxing and the rest were originally in a terrible state. When they suddenly saw the figures in front of them, they did not care about anything else and immediately shouted, "Help us. We will definitely thank you." As the distance between the two parties was not too close and there were trees in the forest, they did not see clearly that Chu Liyue and the rest were in front of them. Chu Liyue frowned. Hearing Nan Yuxing's anxious voice and the scream from Nanny just now, it was not difficult to deduce that they were definitely in trouble now. However, because Taizu's reaction was extremely fast, she did not see the specific situation over there clearly. However, it was precisely because Taizu's reaction was fast and strong that she was even more certain that this was definitely not a good thing. Thinking about how arrogant those people were before they came in. Now that even they were forced to this point, it was obvious that they were in trouble. They were about to get out safely. If they were dragged down by others at this time, Chu Liyue was not sure if she would have the intention to kill them. However, because they could not use force in the forest, their speed did not increase by much. On the other hand, Nan Yuxing and the rest were already forced into a life-and-death situation. How could they care so much? They only knew how to use their full speed to attack. The distance between the two parties was rapidly shrinking. Chu Liyue could even hear the strange rustling sound behind her. She could not help but look back. The moment she saw it, her pupils immediately shrank. In the forest, Nan Yuxing and the rest were fleeing in a sorry state. Nanny looked panicked and her face was full of tears. There was also an additional wound on her left shoulder. Although it had been reluctantly bandaged with gauze, a dark red color still seeped out. The two elders were protecting them from behind, but they did not seem to be in good condition either. And behind them, several scarlet leaves were rapidly approaching. Wherever those leaves passed, they actually tore open black spatial cracks. It was as if they would swallow them up at any time. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 1637. Things had developed to this stage, and it was beyond Nan Yuxing and the rest's expectations. At that time, Nanny was so agitated by Rong Xiu's words that she couldn't take it anymore and ran away crying. After Nan Yuxing chased after her, he saw that Nanny had unknowingly run to the edge of the Scarlet Soul Forest. He was worried and wanted to bring her back immediately. Although the Scarlet Soul Forest wasn't difficult for them, it would definitely be dangerous for Nanny to go in alone in her current state. Nan Yuxing wanted to persuade her to come back before they went in with the two elders. However, Nanny was so agitated that she plunged into the Scarlet Soul Forest without thinking. In fact, Nan Yuxing caught up very quickly. However, the crux of the matter was that when Nanny barged into the Scarlet Soul Forest, the force in her body was surging violently. This time they were in trouble. When Elder Bai Tong and Elder Wu Peng caught up, something was wrong with the surroundings. Not long after, those leaves fell and started to attack Nanny. The injury on her shoulder was caused at that time. After that, they had no choice but to deal with the danger while desperately running outside. Fortunately, these two elders, including Nan Yuxing, weren't weak, so they were barely able to hold on until now. It wasn't easy for them to see someone, so they wanted to ask for help. They didn't expect the other party to run away after hearing their call for help. Nan Yuxing's resentment finally reached its peak when he saw the faces of those people. "Why are you guys here?" His expression changed drastically and even his footsteps slowed down. Chu Liyue found it funny. They were the ones who ran over and even brought the danger over, yet they still had the cheek to ask such a question? Ignore them. Taizu turned back and saw those red leaves crazily strangling them. He frowned and turned to leave at an even faster speed. Seeing them leave without a word, Nan Yuxing was even more resentful. If they hadn't bullied Yi, they wouldn't have fallen to such a state. Originally, everything was well prepared, but now there was endless trouble. It wasn't that they didn't know how difficult it was to deal with the Scarlet Soul Forest. Nan Yuxing gritted his teeth. Since things had already come to this, he might as well drag them down with him. If they couldn't leave this place, then the other party had to stay as well. Thinking of this, Nan Yuxing suddenly increased his speed. This time, the origin power aura on his body became even denser. Even the leaves on the surrounding trees began to fall and rush towards him. Rong Xiu glanced back when he noticed the commotion behind him. A cold killing intent flashed through his eyes. His hand moved slightly, but Taizu suddenly shouted at him to stop. "Rong Xiu, Don't use your force. They were about to leave, and if they attacked now, all their efforts would be for naught. Rong Xiu's eyes narrowed dangerously. In the end, he suppressed his urge and did not make a move. At this moment, Nan Yuxing had already arrived in front of them. His body had been scratched by the leaves and was bleeding profusely. But he didn't care. With a flash of cold light, a long sword suddenly appeared in his hand, and he went straight for Rong Xiu. But just as the sword was about to pierce Rong Xiu, Nan Yuxing suddenly tilted his wrist, changed the direction and attacked Chu Luiyue. He was here for Chu Luiyue. In an instant, Rong Xiu's eyes seemed to be surging with turbulent waves. However, just as he was about to make a move, a reddish-gold light suddenly flashed in front of Chu Luiyue. Nan Yuxing only saw a blur in front of him, and a girl who looked no more than 3 or 4 years old suddenly appeared in front of him. The girl was petite and wore a reddish-gold lotus leaf dress. Her 2 white little feet were bare, and her hair was tied up in 2 buns with a red string and a golden bell. She was very beautiful and cute. Her large, grape-like eyes made her look even more innocent. Nan Yuxing frowned subconsciously. Why did such a little girl suddenly appear? Could it be the child of these 2? But if that was the case, how did they hide this child before? You're so annoying. Before he could figure it out, he heard the little girl in front of him suddenly speak. She fiddled with the bell on her head. Her expression was innocent, but there was also a hint of laziness and indifference. Nan Yuxing was stunned at first, but then a fierce look flashed across his face. Who cares who she is? Since she's with those people, I'll just kill her. He did not stop moving, and the sharp blade pierced straight ahead. When the sword fell, it would definitely pierce through the little girl's heart. Dumpling finally stopped fiddling with the bell and looked forward. The tip of the sword was already a fist's distance away from her forehead. Her hair was blown up by the cold wind, and the corner of her dress swayed. Nan Yuxing's lips curled into a cold smile. However, in the next moment, the expression on his face suddenly froze. Because his sword had suddenly stopped. The other end of the sharp blade was grabbed by a chubby little hand. Nan Yuxing did not react for a moment. This little girl had actually blocked his attack with her bare hands? How was this possible? Although he had not used his full strength, he had definitely used 70 to 80% of it. Such a child, how could, crack? A crisp breaking sound was heard. Nan Yuxing watched as his sword was forcibly broken by the other party's little hand. In the next moment, before he could react, the little figure in front of him suddenly approached rapidly. So fast. Nan Yuxing was shocked. He did not sense any fluctuation of force from the other party at all. How could she have such a fast movement technique? However, he no longer had time to think about this. Bang. A dull sound was heard. An intense pain quickly spread from his lower abdomen. Dumpling had directly approached and punched Nan Yuxing's body. Nan Yuxing's hand unconsciously loosened, and the sword fell to the ground with a clang. At the same time, his body flew backwards and landed heavily on the ground. Big brother? Eldest young master? Nan Yi and the rest were shocked when they saw this scene. Due to the pain, Nan Yuxing's body was bent into the shape of a shrimp. He felt that several of his ribs were broken, and his internal organs were squeezed into a ball. He was in so much pain that he did not know if they had ruptured. His face was pale and he was covered in cold sweat. He almost fainted. In a daze, there was only one thought left in his mind. That little girl, who exactly is she? She actually has such a strong combat ability? Whoosh, a rustling sound could be heard. Nan Yuxing opened his eyes with difficulty, and to his horror, he saw countless red leaves coming towards him. Ah! A shrill scream resounded in the forest. Tuanzi spread out her hands and shrugged helplessly. I already said that you are very annoying. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1638. Dumpling was a crimson gold heavenly phoenix, and she had already opened her 4th meridian. Although she looked like a white and tender ball of flesh, in reality her physical strength was extremely strong. She wouldn't care even if 100 swords attacked her at the same time, let alone a single sword. She didn't need to use force. A gentle punch was enough to kill the other party. Nan Yuxing was already injured and he looked down on Dumpling. If he wasn't dealt with, who would be dealt with? Nan Yi and the rest panicked when they saw Nan Yuxing's figure being swallowed by the red leaves. They couldn't care less about the danger and rushed over. They didn't even have the time and energy to get angry. All they could think of was to save Nan Yuxing as soon as possible. If they were too late then, Dumpling, let's go. Chu Luiyue waved at Dumpling. I'm coming. Dumpling replied happily. She immediately turned around and ran toward Chu Luiyue. Tuanzi originally wanted to throw herself into her arms, but when she caught a glimpse of the corner of her white clothes, she restrained herself. "Well done." A cold voice came from above. Dumpling widened her eyes in shock and looked at Rongxiu in disbelief. His expression was calm, but there was a rare look of admiration in his eyes. This, was he praising her? Dumpling blinked, but Rongxiu had already looked away. Her eyes darted around as she tried to pull Chu Luiyue's sleeves with her small hands. Chu Luiyue grabbed her hand. Tuanzi hurriedly glanced at Rongxiu and saw him raise his brows, but he did not say anything. Did he agree? Dumpling was overjoyed. She could finally be together with Ayu openly. She hurriedly grabbed Chu Luiyue's hand tightly and followed her step by step, not forgetting to ask, Ayu, did I perform well just now? Chu Luiyue couldn't help but laugh. After so many years, Dumpling had broken through from the 9-colored heavenly pheasant to her current appearance. Her strength and bloodline had increased tremendously, but her personality was still the same as before. Every time he did something he would always rush over excitedly to claim credit. Chu Luiyue pinched her nose. Well done. A big smile bloomed on Dumpling's face. If he had known that the reward this time would be so good, he would have thrown a few more punches just now. If Nan Yuxing knew what Dumpling was thinking, he would probably vomit blood. Just to hold hands with his master and talk to him, he beat him to death? The most important thing was that he could really fight. In this Crimson Soul Forest, all the cultivators didn't dare to use their origin power arbitrarily. Once they did, it was a risk of life and death. However, there was one person who was able to defeat all of them just by relying on his physical strength alone. Was there any justice in this world? Of course, Chu Luiyue and the rest weren't interested in knowing what happened to Nan Yuxing and the rest. After walking for a short distance, the sky finally brightened up. Sheng Wanjing finally said, "We're out." Hearing Taizu's voice, Chu Luiyue took a step forward. At this moment, she clearly felt that everything around her seemed to have changed subtly. Without the cover of the forest, the sunlight poured down without restraint. Chu Luiyue squinted slightly. After getting used to the light, she looked ahead. In the wilderness, as far as the eye could see, countless broken tombstones were scattered everywhere. They had entered the Crimson Soul Forest since noon and took about 4 hours to come out. It was still afternoon when the sun was still shining. However, at a glance, the scene in front of them sent chills down their spines. So this is the Godslayer tomb, Chu Luiyue muttered softly. The Godslayer tomb was indeed a graveyard. There seemed to be an invisible barrier in the sky. The warm and bright sunlight was blocked outside. No matter how good the weather was, it was still cold and bleak here. A gloomy aura was looming. This is only the edge of the Godslayer tomb. Those who died here were all exalted gods. Sheng Wanjing explained. Chu Luiyue held her breath slightly. At a glance, there were at least hundreds of tombstones here. And these were all exalted gods. More importantly, with their strength they could only be at the edge of the Godslayer tomb? Then what was deeper inside? After passing through here and entering the center of the Godslayer tomb, you will find the tombs of exalted gods. Sheng Wanjing's voice was very calm. But in Chu Luiyue's ears, every word was like thunder. The tombs of exalted gods? How many had died to be called a tomb? She only knew that the Godslayer tomb was a dangerous place where many exalted gods were buried, but she didn't know the truth was so horrifying. One had to know that in the entire Ling Shao Academy, the number of supreme gods that were still alive did not exceed the number of fingers on one hand. But there were so many buried here. Tens of thousands of years ago, a bloody battle broke out here. It was said that the battle lasted for 81 days. Countless top exalted gods died in the battle and were buried here in the end. That's how the Godslayer tomb came to be. Sheng Wanjing seemed to have seen Chu Luiyue's confusion and explained patiently. It was said that at that time the Divine Ruins world was full of force. Exalted gods were not numerous, but there were many of them. That's why so many peerless exalted gods were implicated in that bloody battle, and they all died here together. That's why the battle was so fierce. Almost all the exalted gods and souls were destroyed. Even their treasures and cultivation arts were all destroyed. That's why the Godslayer tomb has become a notorious place of evil over the years. Sheng Wanjing sighed as if he found it a pity. Because of that battle, countless inheritances were broken. Chu Luiyue frowned and couldn't help but ask, then why did such a fierce battle break out at that time? It sounded like it wasn't a conflict between a few forces, but many people were involved. Sheng Wanjing pondered for a moment. It's been tens of thousands of years. How do the descendants know? It's just that, when I came here that year I accidentally found some clues. They seemed to be fighting over a book. Chu Luiyue was stunned. A book? What kind of book? Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from the Love Network. Chapter 1639. I don't know about that. Sheng Wanjing shook his head. The battle back then was full of mysteries to the later generations. It was already extremely rare to be able to inadvertently find a clue. As for the rest, it was even more difficult for him to find out more. Chu Luiyue thought about it and agreed. Everyone in the world didn't know about it, let alone Taizu, an outsider. Moreover, he came here back then to accompany that friend of his to find something. It was an accident that he knew about this. Since most of those people's treasures were destroyed, then what was left should be extraordinary, right? Chu Luiyue finally couldn't help but ask. Taizu, is the thing you were looking for really just to help a high god expert break through to the venerable god realm? Taizu was stunned, then frowned. He had never thought about this. Every time he thought of the god-slaying mound, he would recall the pain of being betrayed. That was why he had tried his best not to think about it all these years. There were many things that had happened during that time that he had not thought about in detail. However, after hearing Chu Luiyue's words, he realized that something was indeed wrong. In the Divine Ruins world, there were countless cultivators who were trapped in the high god realm for their entire lives and could not advance further. Because at this stage of cultivation, it was already time to rely on talent. No matter how diligent one was, without talent and comprehension, one would not be able to successfully break through. Therefore, when he heard that there was such a treasure back then, he did not hesitate to follow that person. At that time he only thought that that person wanted it and he had never doubted it. But now that he thought about it, there was indeed something wrong everywhere. He didn't need that thing and he wouldn't fight with that person. Why did that person want to kill him? One had to know that if he died, that person would lose a top-notch weapon refining venerable. This could only prove that the value of that thing in that person's eyes was higher than that of a weapon refining venerable. And such an item was rare in the world. Sheng Wanjing suddenly felt that his memories of the past seemed to be covered by a layer of gauze, and they became unclear. The truth that he believed back then, perhaps, there was something else going on? Sheng Wanjing's heart beat violently. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and calmed his emotions. Perhaps, he paused for a moment but didn't continue. Instead he changed the topic. Forget it, let's talk about this later. He looked at Chu Luiyue. That person told you to come to the god-slaying mound, but did he specify the meeting place? Chu Luiyue looked into the distance. He didn't say it explicitly. But I should be able to reach it with the guidance of the sea buckthorn wooden token. The other party had put in so much effort to lure her here, so there was no way he would refuse to see her. Tomorrow is the day we meet. Chu Luiyue pondered for a moment. Perhaps he will only appear tomorrow. Sheng Wanjing thought about it and felt that it made sense. Then should we wait here or, let's go inside and take a look? Chu Luiyue stared straight ahead, slowly clenching his fists in his sleeves. She had a premonition. The other party definitely had a motive for inviting her here. Then, what is it? They officially entered the god-slaying mound. Broken tombstones were scattered everywhere, and there were no bones to be seen. Tens of thousands of years of wind, frost, and snow had already sharpened everything. Chu Luiyue walked through, glancing at the tombstones. She could see that there used to be words carved on them, but now those words had been eroded by time and became blurred. Most of them only had faint traces left. After walking for a while, Chu Luiyue felt that the heat on her body had been swallowed up silently. The surrounding cold air silently engulfed her. Without these tombstones, no one would know that under this vast and desolate land, there were countless skeletons of strong masters of the supreme gods. Their moods seemed to have been affected by the atmosphere. They walked forward quietly. Even Dumpling, who had always been cheerful and noisy, noticed something at this time. She grabbed Chu Luiyue's hand, pursed her lips, and followed without saying a word. After walking for a while, Chu Luiyue frowned more and more. She pondered for a long time and finally spoke. Taizu, do you know who set up these tombstones? If it was a descendant, why were these tombstones broken? Taizu paused and his voice was much lower. They should have been set up by the strong masters who participated in the war back then. Chu Luiyue's heart skipped a beat. They had set up tombstones without even fighting. This was the determination to die. No wonder the war back then was so tragic. So many strong masters of the supreme gods had been killed in their souls. What kind of book could cause them to act like this? Chu Luiyue could not figure it out. Perhaps only those people back then knew the answer. Crack. Something bumped against her foot. Chu Luiyue looked down and saw a fist-sized rock that seemed to have rolled over from the side. Chu Luiyue was deep in thought just now, so she didn't notice it. However, this rock was very ordinary and it didn't hurt when it hit her foot. Moreover, it stopped there. Chu Luiyue didn't take it to heart. She continued walking forward. Not long after, another rock rolled over. This time, Chu Luiyue saw it in advance. She raised her eyebrows slightly. Because this rock was also coming for her. She didn't move. She only took a step to the side when the rock was about to rush over. The rock rolled past her previous position, but it quickly stopped. Chu Luiyue narrowed her eyes. She could clearly see that this rock wasn't obstructed at all. It stopped on its own. You are what's wrong? Sheng Guanjing sensed that something was wrong with her and turned to ask. Chu Luiyue didn't say anything and looked around. Although there were many broken tombstones scattered here, it was flat and spacious. Why was there a rock rolling towards her out of nowhere? And there was more than one. Just as this thought flashed through her mind, Chu Luiyue heard a soft sound behind her. She turned to look. As expected, another rock was heading straight for her. Digression. When I woke up in the morning, I realized that my lousy laptop had automatically deleted my writing software. Fortunately, I installed it in my new laptop before. After tossing and turning for a while, it was 12:30 p.m. Mobile users. Please browse and read. A better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1640. Then a second piece and a third piece. The surrounding stones seemed to be guided by some kind of power. They all became restless and moved toward Chu Luiyue. This is... Sheng Guanjing was also stunned. He had never encountered such a situation when he came here before. More importantly, this movement was obviously coming for Chu Luiyue. What was going on? Rong Xiu frowned slightly and held Chu Luiyue's hand. We have to leave as soon as possible. These stones are all from the broken tombstones of the supreme gods. Being chased by broken tombstones was already uncomfortable enough. Moreover, these were all supreme gods' tombstones? Not to mention that these stones might contain a certain amount of power. No one could be sure about that. Therefore, Rong Xiu made a prompt decision to leave with Chu Luiyue immediately. Chu Luiyue's eyes met with his and she lightly nodded. Okay. Chu Luiyue and the others began to speed up and move toward the center of the god-slaying mound. Behind them, more and more stones rolled toward them. It would be fine if there were only a few. However, as time passed, the stones had almost gathered into a river and were rushing toward Chu Luiyue. This scene was too strange. However, what made Chu Luiyue feel strange was that she did not sense any killing intent from these stones. They seemed to be controlled by something and kept gathering toward her. However, specifically, it seemed that they did not intend to do anything. Of course, Chu Luiyue did not dare to let her guard down. She could only rely on her feelings to determine whether there was danger. After all, this was the god-slaying mound. Fortunately, Taizu had been here before and was experienced, so he could quickly find a safe way forward. Along the way they were scared but not in danger. However, after walking for a long time, the surrounding scenery did not change at all. Taizu had said before that as long as they entered the tombstones of the supreme gods, these strange stones would definitely stop. But after such a long time, it still seemed so far away. Chu Luiyue could not help but ask, Taizu, when can we get out of here? Sheng Guanjing glanced at the sky and said uncertainly, that's right. About 4 to 6 hours left. In fact, he was still understating it. Back then he had walked here for 3 days and 3 nights. Even though it was his first time here and he didn't know where to go, it was enough to prove that this place was vast and he couldn't leave so quickly. Chu Luiyue's heart sank. She knew Taizu too well. This meant that they might stay here for a longer period of time. Now that they were moving at full speed, those behind them still couldn't catch up. There was always a certain distance between them. However, their strength was constantly being depleted while the rocks were constantly converging. As their numbers increased, Chu Luiyue noticed that their aura and energy were much stronger than before. No one could guarantee that they would be able to walk out safely. Chu Luiyue felt a headache coming on. Could it be that there's something special on me that's causing this commotion? But it doesn't seem like anything. Wasn't everything fine in the past? Why is it so strange here? The key was that all cultivators could not fly here. This made their situation even more difficult. At this moment, a rock suddenly rolled to the bottom of Chu Luiyue's feet. Her heart skipped a beat. Her body fell to the side uncontrollably. Rong Xiu was standing beside her. When he saw this, he immediately hugged her slender waist and pulled her into his arms. Chu Luiyue felt that she had fallen into a broad and firm chest. A cold fragrance instantly enveloped her. Just as she helped Rong Xiu stand up, she heard Taizu's exclamation behind her. Chu Luiyue knew that something was wrong. She immediately turned around and saw that Taizu seemed to have slipped on the rocks and was falling backward. Most importantly, when the great ancestor fell halfway, the void behind him suddenly rippled with a few waves. Half of Taizu's body was then swallowed by the void. Taizu. Before Chu Luiyue could finish her sentence, Taizu's figure had completely disappeared. Just like that, he disappeared before their eyes without making a sound. Chu Luiyue's eyes widened. She was about to go forward when Rong Xiu hugged her tightly. That's the void turbulence. Then, Chu Luiyue saw that the moment they rolled to the edge of the fluctuating void, they turned into dust. Her heart suddenly trembled. Senior Shangguan is a venerable god expert. He can definitely protect himself. Rong Xiu said in a low voice. She was still a venerable god, so she naturally could not go over. Chu Luiyue gritted her teeth. Rong Xiu was right. Taizu was powerful and had been here before. Nothing should happen to him. What she needed to do now was to protect herself. Gradually the ripples calmed down. Everything seemed to have returned to normal, as if nothing had happened. Chu Luiyue had just opened her mouth when she suddenly felt a strong suction force beside her. She quickly turned her head and saw that the rocks had unknowingly formed some strange pattern on the ground. And that powerful force was erupting from the center of it. It was as if it was going to swallow her. The wind howled. Chu Luiyue's hair danced wildly. Rong Xiu hugged her tightly and pressed her head against his chest. Hold me tight. Chu Luiyue instinctively hugged his lean waist even more tightly. Rong Xiu looked up. Two extremely intense colors, one gold and one black, suddenly appeared in his eyes. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1641. An incomparably powerful aura suddenly erupted from Rong Xiu's body. The next moment, black and gold flames suddenly appeared in the void in front of him. They intertwined and condensed into a long whip, which was violently lashed out in front of him. Smack. The crisp sound of the whip breaking through the air was heard. On the ground, the formation formed by the stones was suddenly destroyed by this terrifying power. Bam bam bam. The sound of stones exploding could be heard. Countless stones were instantly reduced to dust. As for that strange power, it was instantly torn apart. Boom. The two forces collided, and the violent aftermath began to spread wildly in all directions. Chu Luiyue only felt that the surrounding space seemed to be crushed by some kind of force, which was almost suffocating. She subconsciously wanted to look up, but she felt a broad and strong hand gently and firmly pressed her back into his arms. The next moment, the suffocating feeling quickly disappeared as if it had never appeared. It's just a small problem. Rong Xiu's voice was exceptionally deep. Chu Luiyue was tightly held in his arms. When he spoke, she could clearly feel his chest vibrating. Warm and firm. It was as if as long as he was there, he could shelter her from all the wind and rain. Chu Luiyue nodded slightly. At this moment, the ground in the middle of the formation of stones suddenly began to collapse. Crack. A crack rapidly spread toward the two of them. Immediately, Chu Luiyue felt that there was nothing under her feet. The bodies of the two suddenly fell downwards. Darkness filled their vision and they could not see anything. Chu Luiyue could only hear the whistling of the wind in her ears, as well as Rong Xiu's heartbeat and breathing. Chu Luiyue wanted to speak, but she found that the pressure around her was so strong that she could not speak. She could not help but be shocked. Now that she was a high god expert, her combat strength was much stronger than cultivators of the same level. To be able to suppress her to this extent, one could imagine how shocking the power here was. Suddenly, a faint golden light appeared and enveloped the two of them. The terrifying pressure around them suddenly lessened. After some time, the two of them finally landed. With both feet on the ground, Chu Luiyue heaved a sigh of relief. She lifted her head from Rong Xiu's arms and looked around. Other than the barrier set up by Rong Xiu, she still could not see anything. What is this place? Chu Luiyue frowned and could not help but mutter softly. What she saw was clearly pitch black, but there seemed to be some faint light flickering. However, the light disappeared very quickly and the light was very dim. This made Chu Luiyue wonder if she was hallucinating. That's the light produced when the divine domains collide with each other. Rong Xiu explained. Chu Luiyue widened her eyes in shock. Those, all of them? If what Rong Xiu said was true, Didn't that mean that there were at least 4 or 5 god areas existing together? That's not right. Chu Luiyue frowned. Why is there a god area here? If she guessed correctly, they had fallen into the ground. However, whether it was underground or above ground, this area was undoubtedly the tombs of the exalted gods. Taizu once said that almost all the cultivators who participated in the war back then had died, and their souls were destroyed. If that was the case, how could there still be a god area left here? Rongxiu looked around. The thick black and gold in his eyes had already disappeared silently, so Chu Luiyue did not see it. He raised his hand and took out a fist-sized pearl. The surroundings were much brighter. However, the two of them did not see much other than the black ground under their feet. The surrounding space was so dark that it seemed like it could not be dissolved. Although the pearl's light could disperse a part of the darkness, it could only illuminate an area of 10 steps. Further away, it was still dark, as if the light had been swallowed up. Rongxiu narrowed his eyes and retracted the barrier around the two of them. The pressure here was much lighter than above. Even without the barrier protecting them, it would not affect the two of them too much. At this moment, Chu Luiyue could feel the surging power around her more clearly. In the darkness, it was very obvious that several forces were silently fighting with each other. Chu Luiyue was very familiar with this feeling. She held her breath and raised her wrist slightly. Countless silver-red light spots suddenly appeared in her palm and surrounded her in the blink of an eye. Soon, a stream of light flashed around her and disappeared in the blink of an eye. However, this time Chu Luiyue saw it clearly. It was indeed a god area beside her. After it intertwined with her own god area, it produced energy waves. However, the power of the god area was weak. It retreated after a light touch. Moreover, it was also because of this that Chu Luiyue did not notice the existence of this god area earlier. Chu Luiyue retracted her god area. She frowned and fell into deep thought. It was impossible for a god area to exist independently of a cultivator. Even though she had experienced life and death, her soul had never truly perished. Therefore, the god area in Mount Pingmin could be safely preserved until now. However, this was the god-slaying tomb. The tombstones outside were enough to explain the problem. Could it be that there were still a small number of people who left their souls in the battle back then? Chu Luiyue murmured, full of uncertainty. At this moment, a stone suddenly rolled to Chu Luiyue's feet. Chu Luiyue looked down and a string in her mind instantly tightened. Where did the stone come from? Why did it seem to be pestering her? Just as Chu Luiyue was about to take action, Rongxiu pulled her back. Wait. Chu Luiyue looked at him in confusion. Rongxiu raised his chin. Chu Luiyue followed his gaze and immediately held her breath. She saw a stream of light suddenly appear in the darkness in front of them. This stream of light did not disappear as quickly as the previous ones. Instead, it seemed to be constantly approaching them. This was, a god area was coming towards them? Just as this doubt flashed through Chu Luiyue's mind, the god area had already approached them. At this moment, with the help of the light of the pearl, Chu Luiyue finally saw that the god area was light blue. The color was very faint, as if it would dissipate with the wind at any time. Chu Luiyue's body tensed up. This god area splash. Before she could think clearly, she saw the god area suddenly pouring down like a waterfall. All of it poured into the stone at Chu Luiyue's feet. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 1642. In less than half an incense's time, the god territory had completely poured into the stone. When the last touch of blue dissipated, the surroundings quickly returned to normal. It was as if nothing had happened. Chu Luiyue was stunned. Just now. What happened? Rongxiu had already bent down and picked up the stone. He held it in his hand and looked at it. His eyebrows raised slightly, showing some interest. I see. What's wrong? As Chu Luiyue asked, he curiously moved closer. Rongxiu handed the stone over. Chu Luiyue looked around carefully. The stone was the size of a fist and was extremely irregular. It seemed to have come from the broken tombstones. It was grayish-white and did not look much different from ordinary stones. Suddenly, Chu Luiyue's eyes focused. He saw a blue mark the size of a fingernail on the stone. This blue mark looked like it had just been painted with paint. It was very clear. It was not difficult to figure out that this was the mark left behind after the god territory poured in. However, at this time, when he held the stone in his hand, he could not feel the existence of the god territory. It was no different from an ordinary stone. If he did not see it with his own eyes, Chu Luiyue would find it hard to believe that a god territory would automatically pour into a stone. Take a closer look at that blue mark. Rong Xiu reminded him. Chu Luiyue moved closer. Suddenly he was stunned. He raised his eyes and looked at Rong Xiu. This is a totem? Chu Luiyue said the last two words very softly. Because the blue mark was only the size of a fingernail. At first glance it was a whole piece. Only when he looked closely could he see the complicated intertwining lines on it. Rong Xiu nodded. It seems that this god territory originally belonged to the owner of this broken tombstone. Otherwise, the realm of the gods would not randomly enter a rock like this. Chu Luiyue thought about it and felt that Rong Xiu's words were highly likely to be true. However, the owner of this tombstone should have died a long time ago. Why hasn't this deity domain dissipated? And buried in such a place? Chu Luiyue said and looked around again. Thinking back to the scene just now, an absurd idea suddenly emerged in her mind. Wait, don't tell me, these god territories all? Before she could finish her sentence, Chu Luiyue felt something hit her foot again. Chu Luiyue didn't even need to see it with his own eyes to know that it was definitely another piece of rock. Her neck was slightly stiff as she lowered her head to take a look. True enough. The shape was different, but it was indeed a stone. There was a faint sound in his ears as if something was approaching. Chu Luiyue looked back and saw a god domain with a faint blue glow slowly drifting over. When he arrived before the two of them, the same thing happened once more. Whoosh! The blue god domain was injected into the second stone and left a small totem on it. Because the mark was too small, Chu Luiyue couldn't tell if the two totems were the same. But now this was not what she was most concerned about. Instead, where was this place and how could she explain everything that had happened? These stones fell down with us just now. Rong Xiu pondered for a moment and looked at Chu Luiyue thoughtfully. It seems that they suddenly attacked just now to pull you down. Pull me down? Chu Luiyue reached out and pointed at her nose, her eyes full of surprise. But why is that? This was her first time in the god-slaying tomb, and she had been following the rules on the way. She didn't seem to have done anything wrong, did she? Why did these stones inexplicably entangle her? There seemed to be a flash of dark light in Rong Xiu's eyes, but it disappeared in an instant. He looked at the thick black beside him. After pondering for a moment he said, "Maybe, there's something on you that they want." Chu Luiyue couldn't figure it out. Could it be that she could become some kind of delicious cake here? If that's the case, doesn't it mean that these god domains and these stones have a certain level of will? And these two things could only carry the will of their owners. Are those people still alive back then? Chu Luiyue couldn't help but murmur in a low voice. No, they are dead. Rong Xiu said calmly. Chu Luiyue was stunned and looked at him suspiciously. How do you know? Rong Xiu paused. Because these god domains are ownerless. Ownerless. Normally, when the owner's soul is destroyed, his god domain won't survive. But it's different here. In the battle of the god-slaying mound, countless experts died, and the power that erupted destroyed this place. For tens of thousands of years, nothing grew here. The monstrous evil spirit intertwined with countless broken souls, causing the force of heaven and earth here to be modeled. All the forces gathered and formed a strange state. Those cultivators are dead, but their fighting spirit from back then has been preserved through some sort of method. It is stored in their tombstones and divine domains. All in all, although the cultivators are dead, their fighting spirit still exists. After Rong Xiu finished speaking, Chu Luiyue fell into deep shock and silence. What kind of earth-shattering battle could cause the fighting spirit to still exist after tens of thousands of years? And what kind of obsession was it that even after the death of the body and the destruction of the soul, it still remained in the world and did not dissipate for a long time? Fighting spirit. Chu Luiyue unconsciously clenched the stone in her hand and frowned slightly. Rong Xiu, how do you know these things? Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1643. As soon as she finished speaking, the surroundings suddenly fell silent for a moment. Rong Xiu looked at her, and there seemed to be waves of light in his deep eyes. His thin lips curled slightly as he said calmly, "There are quite a lot of books in the Yuntian Tower's collection. Although very little was known about the battle back then, there were still some related rumors that had been recorded and passed down. It was not difficult to find out about these." Chu Luiyue nodded in understanding. That was true. The Yuntian Tower had stood in the divine ruins for tens of thousands of years and had a deep foundation. It was normal for them to have some understanding of this. The great ancestor knew very little about this place. To a large extent it was because he was an outsider. Naturally, he could not be compared to Rong Xiu's background. Moreover, although these divine territories still exist in the world, after tens of thousands of years of exhaustion, their power is basically very thin. Otherwise, it would be impossible for so many divine territories to exist at the same time in such a small space. Chu Luiyue heard this and picked up the second stone. She looked at the two stones in her hand carefully and pursed her lips. Rong Xiu's words made sense. When she used the divine territory just now, she did feel that no one was controlling it. Fighting spirit. If that was the case, what existed in this place right now was the fighting spirit? But why were these stones stuck to her for no reason? Chu Luiyue could clearly feel that these two stones did not have any ill intentions towards her. On the contrary, it seemed, there was a trace of dependence and intimacy. This feeling was very subtle. Chu Luiyue had been in a nervous state earlier, so she did not feel much. However, now that she knew that this was just fighting spirit left behind after the battle back then, her heart relaxed. Only then did she realize that something was wrong. Just as she was thinking about this, the third stone rolled to her feet. Soon, another divine territory poured into it. From the initial shock and surprise, Chu Luiyue was basically used to it now. The only thing she wanted to know now was if she played any role in it. Can we still go out? Chu Luiyue looked up. Rong Xiu pondered for a moment. When we came down just now, we also triggered spatial turbulence. Even if he went up now, he wouldn't be in the same position as before. Then, let's wait for a while. About 2 hours later, the space turbulence will calm down again. At that time, it would be much more convenient for us to go out. Chu Luiyue nodded. For now, this was indeed the best solution. The Rong Xiu took out a few more pearls and quietly suspended them around the two of them. Then he took out a black cloak and spread it on the ground. Have a seat first. During this period of time, they had been hurrying along. Although they had rested a few times in between, Chu Luiyue had been moving at full speed in order not to slow them down, which consumed a lot of energy. After entering the Scarlet Soul Forest, they even rushed all the way. It was always good to be able to rest and adjust for a while. Chu Luiyue took his hand. You should rest as well. She knew that the Rong Xiu had not rested much during this period of time. They traveled during the day and refined at night. He was the one who consumed more energy. Sensing the soft touch in his palm, the Rong Xiu raised his eyebrows slightly. It seems that Madame loves her husband dearly. Chu Luiyue, so after so many years, this man's skin had really become thicker and thicker. Just like that, the two of them began a long wait. 2 hours was not a long time, but the surroundings were silent and dark. Other than this small area around them, they could not see anything else. It really made one feel uneasy. Moreover, Chu Luiyue was still worried about the safety of Taizu, so this time seemed even more unbearable. After waiting for a while, she simply closed her eyes and planned to enter a state of mind to cultivate. But she soon realized that this idea was impossible to achieve, because the surrounding stones were still rolling towards her. Another piece and another piece. In a short while, there was a neat row of them at her feet. Chu Luiyue wanted to resist at first, but she gave up in the end. These stones and god realms did not have any ill intentions towards her. They just knocked her lightly and she did not lose anything. Moreover, as the surrounding god realms entered these stones one after another, she could clearly feel that the inexplicable pressure had lessened significantly. Thinking about it, it was because these god realms were piling up and pressing against each other that it was uncomfortable. Since that was the case, so be it. Chu Luiyue lowered her gaze to take a look. In any case, more than half of the stones had already piled up around her. When all the spots were filled, it should be over. But reality proved that Chu Luiyue was still too naive. When the last space around her was occupied by a stone, she thought that this was the end of it. But in the next moment, she saw that the stones from before suddenly began to retreat from her side and retreat towards the back. At the same time, a new piece of rock appeared out of nowhere, and rolled over to him with a chi-chi-chi sound. Like a relay race, the stones took turns to roll to her side. When the god realms poured into them and left a mark, they obediently left for the next batch. Seeing how orderly they were, Chu Luiyue, who was used to seeing storms and waves, could not help but widen her eyes. She was in a mess. What did they take her for? She gritted her teeth and moved to the side. The stones rolled along with her. After trying 2 or 3 times, Chu Luiyue gave up struggling again. In fact, she had already discovered the problem. These stones had to touch her before they could contain the god realms. It was also because of this that they were so persistent towards her. Chu Luiyue touched her chin. Thinking about it, she had been chased by those stones for so long outside. Was it actually just for this purpose? Chu Luiyue rubbed the space between her eyebrows. She had finally seen how powerful and strange this Godslayer tomb was. At present, Everything that happened here seemed exceptionally strange. She did not know why these stones were so fixated on her. Unable to figure it out, Chu Luiyue decided not to think about it and continued to study Shen formations. Ever since she repaired the Sky Shuttle formation with Debao's help, she had made significant progress in Shen formations. It was a pity that Debao did not see her after that and left directly. She still had some questions that she did not have time to ask. She could only wait until the next time they met to learn from each other. Time passed slowly. Chu Luiyue held her breath and concentrated. She kept trying to draw those Shen formations in her mind. With her current strength, it was impossible for her to draw the Sky Shuttle formation in her mind. Thus, according to her previous memories, she recalled and studied those scattered profound formations one by one. You are. A low and gentle voice suddenly sounded in her ear. Chu Luiyue opened her eyes. What's wrong? Should we go? Rong Xiu nodded, but he looked like he wanted to say something. It might be a little troublesome. How? Chu Luiyue inadvertently glanced at him and her voice came to an abrupt stop. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1644. Stones. Large stones. Stones piled up into mountains. The empty space in front of her had unknowingly been occupied by countless piles of stones. It had almost completely sealed the path. Why are there so many? Chu Luiyue could not hide her shock and blurted out. She had thought that there would only be a few dozen pieces. Rong Xiu raised his chin subtly. Chu Luiyue's heart skipped a beat. Suddenly she thought of something and turned her neck stiffly to look back. Stones. And stones. The stones around the two of them had almost formed a wall. Furthermore, upon closer inspection, those stones were clearly shining with totems. These stones had all been infused with different divine domains. Chu Luiyue sucked in a cold breath. She had only closed her eyes to rest for a while and drew a few Shen formation diagrams. How did the world become like this the moment she opened her eyes? The only consolation was that the last trace of pressure around her had completely dissipated. Standing here, there was basically no difference from standing outside. The corner of Chu Luiyue's eyes twitched. She did not think that those god domains had already been scattered into these stones. She might feel better. Are we still going out? Chu Luiyue looked at Rong Xiu and asked with difficulty. Rong Xiu raised his eyebrows and chuckled. These god domains have already hidden themselves, and the turbulence above has subsided. Naturally we can go out. As he spoke, he had already held Chu Luiyue's hand. Their fingers were intertwined. Chu Luiyue's heart calmed down and she nodded. That's good. She had a feeling that if she continued to stay here, something would happen. Let's go. Rong Xiu said and was about to bring her up. Wait. Chu Luiyue suddenly called out to him, then turned around and took a step forward. Crash. The stones piled up in front of them suddenly rolled to both sides, quickly making a wide path in the middle. Chu Luiyue froze in midair. She just wanted to pick up Rong Xiu's cloak. What the hell were these rocks doing? Chu Luiyue gritted his teeth and picked up the cloak on the ground. There was some dust on it. Chu Luiyue turned his wrist and shook it lightly. Crash. The stones gathered together again and lined up neatly in front of Chu Luiyue. Chu Luiyue? They seem to listen to you. Rong Xiu held back his laughter and took the cloak. At the same time, he leaned close to her ear and said in a teasing tone. The warm breath fell on Chu Luiyue's neck and ears, making him feel a little itchy. She shrunk her neck and turned around to glare at Rong Xiu angrily. Nonsense. Swish, 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 swish. Several stones suddenly flew up and went straight for Rong Xiu. They were extremely fast and their auras were piercingly cold. Chu Luiyue's eyes sharpened. She immediately took a step forward and the force around her surged. Sensing her movement, the stones actually stopped abruptly. Chu Luiyue stared at them. The stones drifted for a while. Sensing her aura, they quickly turned around and went back. Perhaps they were afraid of being scolded by Chu Luiyue, but they actually hid behind the stones and stayed there obediently. Chu Luiyue, Rong Xiu could not help but chuckle softly. I told you so, but you didn't believe me. Chu Luiyue's temples throbbed. 2 steps to the left. 2 steps to the right. Move forward. Forget it, take 3 steps back. Who was the one who rushed out and wanted to attack? Come out. Yes, I'm talking about you guys. Hurry up. Jump one more time for me to see. All right. Go back. Chu Luiyue rubbed her face. After a period of demonic inspection, she finally realized that Rong Xiu's words were indeed very accurate. She did not know what was wrong with these stones. They suddenly became obedient to her. She said to the left, but she did not dare to the right. She said to take 2 steps, but she definitely would not take 3. She chose a few stones to jump, and they actually followed her instructions. Looking at the pile of stones in front of her, Chu Liwei felt a headache coming on. What's wrong? What went wrong in the middle? Is it because they touched me just now that they're so obedient now? Chu Liwei crossed her arms and rested her chin on one hand, deep in thought. Originally, these stones and the god domains were separated from each other. It's because they're leaning against you that they can merge with each other. This might make the fighting spirit last longer. That's why they're treating you like this. Rongxiu explained. Chu Liwei rubbed her temples. Fighting spirit? Such a soft and harmless obedient appearance, where was the slightest bit of fighting spirit to speak of? What happened to being incomparably fierce? What happened to being monstrous? Why did this fighting spirit completely change when it came to her? Chu Liwei could not figure it out. She could not figure it out. After pondering for a moment, there was no answer. Chu Liwei let out a long sigh. Forget it. Let's discuss these questions later. Let's go out first. As she spoke, she waved at the stones in front of her. Please make way. Crash, the piled stones immediately made a path. The 2 of them walked forward and then flew up together. Without that terrifying pressure, the 2 of them moved much more smoothly. However, not long after, Chu Liwei heard a strange fluctuation coming from below. Her heart skipped a beat and then she slowly looked down. A river, formed from stones, was surging from the bottom to the top. Unlike the time outside, this time the stones were very restrained and polite. They were very obedient. Everything was neat and tidy. Other than the rustling sound of wind, there was almost no sound of collision between them. If Chu Liwei had not noticed something and looked down, she might not have noticed this abnormality. Chu Liwei felt like she was going crazy. Why were these stones so difficult to deal with? She had offended many people in the past, but she had never seen anyone as persistent as these stones. Are they going to keep following us like this? Chu Liwei asked in disbelief. Rongxiu paused and suddenly smiled. Don't you think that they're not chasing you, but they're following you? Digression. At about 12:30 p.m. mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 1645. Chu Liwei was suddenly stunned. Of course she understood what Rongxiu meant. But, was that possible? These stones looked ordinary, and because they were broken tombstones they even had a cold aura. However, Chu Liwei saw with her own eyes that so many god realms had surged into these stones one after another. Indeed, the power of those god realms had become very weak, and some even seemed to be able to shatter with just a little bit of force. But, those were god realms after all. Moreover, there were so many here. Once these forces were gathered, it would undoubtedly be an extremely powerful force. Chu Liwei had never thought of this before. Because not long after they entered the god-slaying tomb, those broken stones began to chase after them aggressively. In the middle, Taizu even lost contact with them. And she and Rongxiu were pulled down because of this. These experiences made it difficult for Chu Liwei to take the initiative to think that these things were actually, but thinking about it carefully, Rongxiu's words seemed to be possible. Otherwise, why would they listen to her so much? Chu Liwei and Rongxiu stopped. The stones also stopped. In the darkness, countless totems of various colors shone faintly. And they just quietly stayed where they were, as if waiting for orders. Chu Liwei's heart skipped a beat, and she raised her wrist gently. A stone flew over and landed in her palm. With a thought, she put the stone into her universe ring. After waiting for a moment, there was nothing unusual. It seemed that she had put an ordinary stone in. However, the stones that were still in place were slightly restless. He was eager to try, but at the same time he was also envious. Chu Liwei was suddenly stunned. How could she sense the emotions of these stones? Could it be that she had established some kind of connection with them because of that touch? Chu Liwei pursed her lips. Come over. As soon as he finished speaking, the stones flew towards Chu Liwei. Chu Liwei didn't know if it was an illusion or not, but he felt that they all seemed to have a kind of excitement and agitation, as if the bitterness is over and the sweetness is coming. In the middle, because some of the stones were too agitated, they rubbed against the stones next to them. Chu Liwei glanced at them indifferently, and they became obedient. One by one they lined up and entered the interspatial ring. Chu Liwei was still counting at first, but then he gave up. Too much. Chu Liwei finally let out a long sigh of relief when the last stone was put into the cosmos ring. His heart was so tired. Rongxiu watched with interest at the side. She didn't seem to realize what kind of trump card she had in her hands. All right, since everything is settled, let's go. As he spoke, he pulled Chu Liwei into his arms and flew up. This time it was very smooth. The two of them successfully returned to the ground in about half an hour. It was already night. The sky was dark without any stars or moon. As far as the eye could see, it was still a wilderness, with some broken tombstones scattered everywhere. Chu Liwei looked and said, "This is indeed not the place we went down before." Rong Xiu looked at her. "How can you be so sure? The scenery here doesn't seem to have changed much." Moreover, the sky was dark so they couldn't see clearly. It was even more difficult to distinguish. However, her tone was very certain. Because, Chu Liwei just opened his mouth but he suddenly paused. "Yes. How can she be so sure? Obviously, she hasn't been here before." Suddenly, she looked at the interspatial ring on her hand. "Seems. Because of those?" she said in a low voice, a little uncertain. When she came out just now, she didn't think much about it. She just intuitively knew that this was another place. This intuition probably came from those stones? That's right. They had been in the god-slaying mound for tens of thousands of years, so they were very familiar with everything here. Now, there was a subtle connection between them and Chu Liwei. Because of this, Chu Liwei naturally became more familiar with this place. Chu Liwei closed her eyes and held her breath. As expected, she seemed to be able to vaguely perceive everything within a radius of dozens of miles. Although it was not so clear, it was undoubtedly a great help for people who came to the god-slaying mound for the first time. In this way it would be much easier and safer for them to stay here. Seeing her expression, Rong Xiu's lips curved up. "Can you feel the aura of Senior Shangguan and Lord Chuning?" Chu Liwei shook her head, but her eyes were still bright, shining like stars. "They shouldn't be here, but it should be much easier to find them later." It seemed that collecting that pile of stones had quite a lot of benefits. This made Chu Liwei feel much more at ease. "That's good." Rong Xiu raised his eyes and glanced at the sky. Tomorrow is the appointed time. At this time, with one more trump card, naturally he would be more confident. Chu Liwei nodded slightly. Suddenly, as if she felt something, she turned her head to look. Dusk was everywhere, and the wilderness at night was completely dark. "What's wrong?" Rong Xiu asked. Chu Liwei frowned slightly. "Rong Xiu, did you feel anything?" Rong Xiu's eyes flickered slightly. "What's the situation?" Chu Liwei clenched her hands, her heart beating rapidly. She opened her mouth with difficulty and said word by word. "If I'm not wrong, this is the tomb of the strong masters of Venerable God. Digression, it's snowing today. See you tomorrow, mobile users. Please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network." Chapter 1646. The scenery here was not much different from what they had seen when they arrived. Even the surrounding aura was similarly cold and desolate. But Chu Liwei could indeed feel that this place was different from the tombs of the exalted gods from before. Rong Xiu narrowed his eyes. "Are you sure?" Chu Liwei nodded slightly. Rong Xiu looked around. His expression was still calm as he raised his eyebrows and chuckled. "Even if this is really the tomb of the exalted gods, there doesn't seem to be much movement now. There's no need to worry." As he spoke, he found a clean and flat spot at the side. "The agreed time will be in a few hours. Since he wants to see us, we'll just wait here." Chu Liwei pursed her lips, and there was a hint of worry in her eyes. She knew that Rong Xiu was right. The other party was here for the water droplet in her body, and her father was his hostage. Before the two sides fought head-on, he definitely wouldn't do anything to her father. But, in the end, she was still worried. In country Yao Qin, her father was considered a top genius and an absolute powerhouse. However, with his level and strength, he was not strong enough outside of country Yao Qin. Not to mention they were in a place like the Divine Ruins world. It had been too long since her father was kidnapped. Chu Liwei knew that he was still alive, but she didn't dare to imagine how much pain and torture he had suffered. Now that she had finally recovered her strength, she could fight with the other party without holding back. However, the closer she got, the more worried she became. And Taizu? She didn't know where he had been swept away by the void turbulence. Rong Xiu walked over, gently rubbed her head, and kissed her forehead. "If you can't sleep, I'll play chess with you." Chu Liu's heart skipped a beat. In the past, whenever she was in a bad mood or was in a mess, she would be able to calm down after playing a game of chess with Rong Xiu. Ever since she regained her memories, the two of them had not sparred. She paused and nodded slightly. "Okay." Whoosh. The two of them stood facing each other with a distance of 10 steps between them. Rong Xiu waved his sleeve and a stream of light flew out from his palm. In an instant, the stream of light split into several silver lines and intertwined in the air to form a huge chessboard. Please go first. Rong Xiu placed his hands behind his back, and a smile appeared on his lips. This was an unspoken rule between the two of them. Most of the time, Chu Luiyue would be the one to go first if they didn't specifically request it. Even so, Chu Luiyue still lost more than he won. Furthermore, even Chu Luiyue couldn't figure out how much Rong Xiu had put in. The faint glow from the chessboard shone on her face, making her look incomparably beautiful. His pair of clear black jade-like eyes were even more dazzling. Chu Luiyue raised his hand, and a red chess piece instantly fell onto the chessboard. With this soft sound, the energy around the chessboard fluctuated. Rong Xiu didn't hesitate and placed his piece down as well. The energy fluctuation produced this time was exactly the same as the fluctuation produced by Chu Luiyue's piece earlier. The huge chessboard quickly returned to its original calm state. Chu Luiyue raised her eyebrows slightly. Using force as chess pieces to compete with each other was a common way for the two of them to play chess. This was even more exhausting than playing on an ordinary chessboard. Not only did it consume a lot of origin power to condense each chess piece, but it also consumed an astonishing amount of energy to maintain the stability of the chessboard after each piece was placed. Now that Chu Luiyue had recovered to the level of a high god, she could barely use this method to fight against Rong Xiu. As for the outcome, it was unknown. After all, even if she had improved a lot in the past few years, Rong Xiu wasn't someone to be trifled with. Time passed slowly, and the huge chessboard shone brighter and brighter. On the other side, after Sheng Guanjing was sucked into the spatial turbulence, his surroundings were plunged into darkness. He couldn't see anything clearly. The only thing he could feel was that something seemed to have crushed his body. For an instant, Sheng Guanjing even felt that his muscles, bones, blood, and flesh were completely crushed. Fortunately, this feeling didn't last for long. After a period of struggle, the darkness before him cracked open a crack, and he seized the opportunity to charge out of the spatial turbulence. Bam! The sky before Sheng Guanjing's eyes lit up. The blinding light caused him to close his eyes unconsciously. Then his body fell through the air and he fell to the ground. Bam! The dull sound was even clearer in the quiet atmosphere. Sheng Guanjing endured the pain in his body and slowly got up. He looked around. It was night and everything was gray and dark. He couldn't see clearly. However, under the black dome, a wall stood in the distant horizon. It was so clear. The wall was completely black. It was very tall and very long. As far as the eye could see, the head and tail of the wall couldn't be seen. Sheng Guanjing's heart thumped when he saw the wall. He had seen this wall before. 1,000 years ago, when he had first come to the Divine Ruins world, he had coincidentally seen this wall. At that time he only felt that it was strange. He didn't know why there was such a wall in the god-slaying tomb. After all, everyone knew that the bloody battle tens of thousands of years ago was tragic. Countless god-level experts fell together, and it almost made the world lose its color. However, there was such a wall here. It was indeed very strange. Unfortunately, he had just been betrayed at that time, and he didn't have the mood to think about other things. Hence, after taking a look from afar, he quickly left in another direction. He didn't expect that when he came here again 1,000 years later, he would see the same scene again. There was no one around. In the silence, he could hear the sound of his heart beating. Sheng Guanjing took a deep breath and immediately moved forward. The god-slaying tomb was vast. If he didn't guess wrongly, this place was very far from where he came from. It wouldn't be that easy to meet up with you, and the rest again. And in this wilderness, that wall was the only obvious landmark. If they could also see it, perhaps, they could meet there. As Sheng Guanjing walked forward, he kept trying to search for Chu Luiyue and Rong Xiu's auras. Fortunately, he didn't run into any major trouble on the way. Although he couldn't detect the auras of the two people, Sheng Guanjing wasn't too discouraged. On the one hand, Chu Luiyue had many trump cards and her fighting strength was very strong. On the other hand, Rong Xiu was with her and would definitely protect her. If it was before, Sheng Guanjing might still be a little worried about this. However, after seeing with his own eyes that Rong Xiu used less than 10 days to refine a King Divine weapon, he knew that he had greatly underestimated him in the past. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from the Love Network. Chapter 1647. When a person was focused on doing one thing, time always passed very quickly. Chu Luiyue and Rong Xiu played chess. 4 hours had passed, but they were only halfway through the game. On the glittering chessboard, the gold and red chess pieces fought against each other. Each of them occupied half of the chessboard, and the battle was intense. However, Chu Liyue's emotions had indeed calmed down during the process. Moreover, the long-awaited battle with Rong Xiu had given Chu Liyue a lot of enlightenment. When the sky was slightly brighter, the game had finally reached its final stage. Chu Liyue's eyes were shining brightly when she finished her word. After a sleepless night, not only did she not look dispirited, but she also seemed to be in high spirits. Her eyes were fixed on the chessboard, but her mind was spinning crazily. In this short period of time, she had already rehearsed countless possibilities. Rong Xiu lifted his eyelids slightly and glanced at her. Seeing her eyes shining, he could not help but chuckle. After so long, she had not changed at all. Rong Xiu waved his wrist gently, and a golden chess piece condensed from force suddenly flew out from his slender white fingers and landed on the chessboard. In an instant, the situation on the chessboard changed drastically. It was as if two dragons of equal strength were fighting fiercely. They were originally evenly matched, but at this moment, a sword suddenly pierced through the air. It directly cut off the dragon head on Chu Liyue's side. One move, the outcome was decided. Chu Liyue was suddenly stunned, and her eyes widened slightly. Rong Xiu's move was not within all the scenarios that she had rehearsed before. He had directly killed her without batting an eyelid. Her eyes were fixed on the chessboard. At this moment she realized that Rong Xiu had already set up a trap, and was only waiting for her to walk into it step by step. She mistakenly thought that the combat strength of both sides was equal, but in fact she was already under the control of her opponent. Bang! The chessboard shattered into countless specks of light that quickly dissipated. Chu Liyue remained rooted to the ground as if he hadn't recovered from his shock. Rong Xiu was about to step forward when Chu Liyue suddenly said, "Rong Xiu, protect me first. I need to think about something." Rong Xiu raised his eyebrows slightly. Since it was his wife's order, he naturally had to comply. All right. He didn't move forward and just stood there with his hands behind his back, waiting patiently. Chu Liyue sat cross-legged with his hands on his knees. He closed his eyes and held his breath. A complicated Xian formation quietly appeared in his mind. Then the second one, the third one, more and more profound formations appeared. At a certain moment, Chu Liyue finally began to attempt to connect these profound formations together. These were the profound formations that she had learned from De Bao in the past. Strictly speaking, they were more or less similar to the Sky Shuttle formation. Previously, she had always wanted to establish a connection between these profound formations and gradually figure out the mysteries of the Sky Shuttle formation, but she had never succeeded. However, after playing this game of chess with Rong Xiu tonight, she instantly understood something. Vaguely, she seemed to have touched an invisible barrier. Chu Liyue's brows twitched slightly. That was the threshold of a great Xian imperial teacher. Even someone as arrogant as Chu Liyue was stunned at this moment. She never thought that she would actually be able to touch the opportunity to break through to a great Xian imperial teacher in such a short time. Although she had already successfully broken through to become a great Xian imperial teacher some time ago, there was a huge gap between a great Xian imperial teacher and a great Xian imperial teacher. Even Elder Hua Feng had stayed in the great Xian imperial teacher for decades before finally breaking through that threshold and officially becoming a great Xian imperial teacher. And it had only been a few months for her. It was too exaggerated. Perhaps it was because she had already memorized countless high-level profound formations a few years ago. Perhaps it was because she had forcefully repaired the Sky Shuttle formation. Or perhaps it was because of the fight with Rong Xiu that she suddenly understood. In short, the surprise came too quickly. Since an opportunity had fallen from the sky, she naturally had to grasp it tightly. At this moment, a ray of white appeared on the horizon. Rong Xiu looked up slightly, and there seemed to be waves surging in his eyes that disappeared in an instant. At the same time, in another place in the god-slaying tomb, there were also a few people slowly moving forward. Elder Wu Peng, let's rest for a while? Nanyi looked at Nan Yuxing beside her. Seeing his pale face, her heart ached. Elder Wu Peng frowned slightly. Before he could speak, Nan Yuxing shook his head. We'll be there soon. Let's go over directly. Nanyi had been crying all the way. At this moment, her eyes were already red and swollen like walnuts, and her pupils were also bloodshot. But big brother, your body, previously in the Red Soul Forest, Nan Yuxing was surrounded by those red leaves. It took them a lot of effort to finally escape. However, the two elders and Nanyi were injured. Needless to say, Nan Yuxing almost lost his life when he went in. He was covered in wounds from head to toe, and there was not a single unscathed spot on his body. Those red leaves were also poisonous. If the two elders had not brought him out in time and used extremely precious pills, Nan Yuxing would probably still be unconscious. Along the way, Elder Bai Tong and Elder Wu Peng had been supporting Nan Yuxing in turn. Elder Bai Tong hesitated for a moment and also persuaded. Eldest young master, the thing is in the god-slaying tomb anyway. Since we've already entered, there's no need to rush. Right now, your body is more important. Nan Yuxing gritted his teeth. He knew that they were doing this for his own good. However, the more they did this, the more it reminded him of how pathetic he was at this moment. He had always been proud and he had never been in such a sorry state. No need. He struggled to walk forward, but his legs suddenly gave way and he fell to the ground. Eldest young master. Big brother. Elder Bai Tong and Nanyi were both worried and hurriedly supported him. Elder Wu Peng clenched his fists in his sleeves and finally spoke. Eldest young master, you should stop and rest for a while. There's still some poison in your body that hasn't been cleansed. If you move forward rashly, I'm afraid it's not good for you. When Elder Bai Tong heard this, he hurriedly agreed. Nan Yuxing had no choice but to nod. Just as they were about to stop and rest, Elder Bai Tong glanced out of the corner of his eye and suddenly saw a somewhat familiar tall figure in the distance. The sky was about to brighten, and he stood in the morning light like a banished immortal. It's him? Not far in front of him, a woman in red was sitting cross-legged and seemed to be cultivating. It was the two people from before. Elder Bai Tong's voice attracted the attention of the other three people. Nan Yuxing looked up. When he saw the two figures clearly, endless anger and resentment surged from the bottom of his heart. If it weren't for them, how would he have fallen to such a state? Kill them. Kill them. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1648. He was agitated and the blood in his body was surging. Just as he finished speaking, he spat out a mouthful of blood. Elder brother. Nanyi retracted her gaze and saw her elder brother's increasingly pale face and the blood at the corner of his mouth. Her heart was in a mess. It's all my fault. It's all my fault. As Nanyi spoke, her tears gushed out again. She bit her lips tightly and a fishy taste filled her mouth. If she hadn't been so willful, her elder brother wouldn't have. Eldest young master, your body is still very weak now. There's no hurry to take revenge. It won't be too late for us to kill them after you recover. Elder Wu Peng was still expressionless, but his voice was colder and filled with a strong murderous intent. Nan Yuxing slowly wiped the blood at the corner of his mouth and stared at the two figures for a long time before he finally said hatefully. All right. Let them live for a while longer. Anyway, they were already at the god-slaying tomb. No matter what, those two people couldn't escape from their control. Elder Bai Tong and Nanyi helped him to the side to rest and took out another pill for him to consume. This is the last pure jade pill. After consuming it, Wu Peng and I will work together to help you completely remove the remaining poison. Your body will recover by 50 to 60%. As Elder Bai Tong spoke, an orange flame surged out of his palm. Bang! He slapped Nan Yuxing's back. The scorching heat instantly spread throughout his body. Nan Yuxing let out a muffled groan. His originally bloodless face instantly flushed red. At the same time, Elder Wu Peng walked to his side and two silver needles appeared in his hand. Eldest young master, bear with it. As he spoke, he had already pierced the two silver needles into Nan Yuxing's index fingers. Soon, black and red blood gushed out from his hands and dripped down the silver needles. Nan Yuxing's eyes were tightly shut. His body was cold and hot for a while. The torture made him tremble all over. Nanyi watched from the side and sobbed softly. Looking at her elder brother's painful appearance, she couldn't help but look back. Her red eyes were filled with bone-chilling resentment. She must take revenge for this. Rong Xiu was watching Chu Luiyue cultivate when suddenly, he heard a clamor. He turned his gaze slightly and glanced at him indifferently. Oh, so it's them, she was really haunting him. Murderous intent flashed across Rong Xiu's eyes, but it disappeared quickly. Then he retracted his gaze and looked at Chu Luiyue again. With a wave of his sleeves, a golden line rapidly swam across the ground. That golden line was extremely thin, and it was hidden in the ground. If one did not look carefully, it would be difficult to detect it. About an hour later, the blood on Nan Yuxing's hands finally turned from black to red. As for the two silver needles, they had turned completely black. Elder Wu Peng pulled out the two needles and pulverized them with a surge of origin power in his palm. Elder Bai Tong finally removed his hand from Nan Yuxing's back and heaved a sigh of relief. Alright, the poison in eldest young master's body has been completely removed. As long as he recuperates, he will recover in 10 days. Due to the pain, Nan Yuxing was drenched in sweat and looked extremely miserable. 10 days, hearing Elder Bai Tong's words, he lowered his head and muttered as he clenched his fists. Ever since he became a high god, he had never suffered such a serious injury. But this time he was tricked by two people whose names and identities he didn't even know. How could he take this lying down? Elder Bai Tong had followed him for many years. How could he not know what he was thinking? His lips moved before he said, "Actually, the leaves of the Scarlet Soul Forest are extremely poisonous. Fortunately, eldest young master has been taking medicinal baths all year round. That's why he could survive until now. If it was an ordinary person, I'm afraid he wouldn't be able to survive." Nan Yuxing didn't feel comforted at all. In his opinion, if it wasn't for Chu Luiyue and Rong Xiu, he would have already left the Scarlet Soul Forest. How could he have suffered such an injury? He had completely forgotten that they were the ones who had caused trouble for others first. He took a deep breath and suppressed the surging emotions in his heart. He stood up and looked ahead. Suddenly he frowned. Why are there only two people over there? Wasn't there another man with them? Alright, and that little girl. He gritted his teeth as he said the last sentence. Elder Bai Tong and the others only realized that something was wrong after he said that. Yet could they be hiding? Elder Wu Peng looked over and shook his head. There are only two of them in the vicinity. Did they get lost? Nan Yuxing's mind flashed with countless guesses. Then he sneered, no matter what, they deserve it. They were outnumbered. Under such circumstances, it was even easier to deal with those two people. The god-slaying mound was full of dangers. It was normal for them to get lost or have accidents. These people had overestimated themselves. Who could they blame? Just as he was about to step forward, Elder Wu Peng stopped him. First, young master, let's wait for a while. Nan Yuxing frowned. What are we waiting for? Those two people are right in front of us. It's easy to go over and kill them. What's there to hesitate and wait for? Elder Wu Peng glanced at him. Have you forgotten where we are? Nan Yuxing's expression changed slightly. Yes, this was the tomb of the supreme god experts. It was extremely difficult for ordinary people to enter this place. Even a supreme god expert might not be able to reach this place in such a short time. Let alone those two people? More importantly, they didn't seem to be injured. Could it be, they have a way to get here directly? Sure enough, they were also here for that thing. Nan Yuxing's expression changed. Elder Wu Peng pondered for a while. We can't be sure about this yet, but we can be sure that they are very capable or have extraordinary treasures on them. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to reach this place unscathed. Also, this old man has no clue as to the identity of that little girl. Speaking of this, Elder Wu Peng frowned tightly. This question had been bothering him for a long time, but he still couldn't find an answer. That little girl looked like she was only 3 or 4 years old, but her combat power was shocking. She could send Nan Yuxing flying with a punch without using her force. Most importantly, the little girl had never shown her face before. She just had to appear when the eldest young master was about to kill that woman. It was too strange. Nan Yuxing gritted his teeth. That little girl is definitely in disguise. He still remembered the taste of that punch. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1649. Are you sure? Elder Wu Peng asked. Of course. Nan Yuxing's answer was resolute. If it wasn't a disguise, there was no way to explain how a 3 or 4-year-old girl could have such terrifying physical strength. It wasn't that he had never seen cultivators with innate divine strength, but he had never seen one who was so heaven-defying. It must be some powerful cultivator who was pretending. As for her sudden appearance, she must have teleported over. Otherwise, how else could it be explained? Elder Wu Peng exchanged glances with Elder Bai Tong when he heard this. Both of them could see the disapproval in each other's eyes. But, when that girl appeared, there were no spatial or force fluctuations. Even a god-level cultivator couldn't teleport like this. Nan Yuxing choked and his expression turned even uglier. If that's the case, then isn't that girl's appearance too strange? Elder Bai Tong suddenly said. Actually, I feel that the way that girl appeared is very similar to a magical beast. Only when summoning one's contracted magical beast could one be so swift and silent. Moreover, the physical strength of magical beasts was indeed generally stronger than that of cultivators. How is this possible? Nan Yuxing felt that this guess was ridiculous. Only two ancient divine beasts in the world can transform into human form. Even so, when they appeared, they would at least appear in the form of a young man. Why would they appear in the form of a little girl? The two elders didn't say anything. This was the only thing they couldn't figure out. Other than that, everything else about that little girl was too similar. Nanny suddenly took a step forward. Big brother, now is indeed a good time for us to make a move. Nan Yuxing looked at her strangely. What? Nanny raised her chin. Look at what that woman is doing. Hearing this, everyone turned to look at him. After a moment, Nan Yuxing's expression changed slightly. Is she preparing to break through? That's right. And, if I'm not wrong, she's a Xian master. Nanny gritted her teeth. Although the distance between them was a little far, Nanny was also a Xian master, so she was extremely sensitive to this. She guessed that the other party must be breaking through as a Xian master. I just don't know what level she's preparing to break through to. Nan Yuxing sneered. What's so important about that? In any case, after today all of this would become nothing. Breaking through is good. At this moment she was undoubtedly at her weakest. Although the man beside her was a king of blacksmiths, he was still only one person. He was definitely no match for them. Was there a better time to strike than now? Nan Yuxing glanced at the two elders beside him. Elder Bai Tong, Elder Wu Peng, you won't stop me this time, right? The two elders looked at each other and nodded. Since that's the case, it's better to get rid of him as soon as possible. They started walking towards Rongxiu and Chuluiyue. This place was flat and spacious. The scattered tombstones were not enough to cover their figures. But they never thought about this and just went straight ahead. His opponent was nothing to worry about. He could just kill him directly. Why waste time and energy on other things? Rongxiu naturally heard their movements, but he didn't take it to heart. He stood in front of Chuluiyue waiting quietly and patiently. Breaking through from a mystic imperial master to a great mystic imperial master was definitely not that simple. So before she broke through, he would help her get rid of all distracting factors. What a coincidence! Nan Yuxing sneered. His eyes moved between Rongxiu and Chuluiyue with undisguised killing intent. I didn't expect that we would meet here again. Rongxiu ignored him. He didn't even look at him. Such an indifferent attitude angered Nan Yuxing more than contempt and mockery. The smile on his face quickly faded and was replaced by a layer of coldness. I'm talking to you, didn't you hear me? Rongxiu raised his eyebrows and glanced at him lazily. Don't disturb others when they are busy. Don't you understand such a simple principle? You? Impudent? Nan Yuxing knew that the other party was arrogant and impudent, but he didn't expect him to be so bold in such a situation. Was he too confident in himself, or did he not realize the danger he was facing? To be able to come here, you do have some ability. Unfortunately, that's all. Nan Yuxing took a deep breath and revealed a sinister smile. If you kneel down and beg for mercy now, I will spare your corpses. Hearing this, Rongxiu raised his eyebrows. He hadn't heard anyone speak to him like this for a long time. What if I say no? Nan Yuxing was so angry that he laughed. You really don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Even if you want to beg for mercy later, you won't have such a chance again. Rongxiu suddenly raised his eyes and looked at the sky. Then he looked at them with a faint smile. You can't afford to offend me. I'm not interested in your lives. For Nan Yifan's sake, I'll let you go this time. But, my patience is limited. If you do this again, I won't be so polite anymore. Hearing this, Nan Yuxing and the others' faces changed. Because Nan Yifan was Nan Yuxing and Nanny's father, and also their patriarch. They looked at each other and saw the shock and suspicion in each other's eyes. This man seemed to know their identities like the back of his hand. And from his tone it seemed like his identity wasn't ordinary either. Otherwise he wouldn't have called Nan Yifan by his name. Who are you? Nan Yuxing's face was extremely ugly. He thought that the other party was an ignorant and fearless lackey, but now it seemed that he wasn't. Elder Bai Tong suddenly thought of something. Rongxiu, wait. He suddenly raised his head and stared at Rongxiu in disbelief. You're the Yuntian Tower's holy son, Rongxiu? They had heard the woman call him that before, but they didn't care at that time. On one hand, they weren't familiar with the Yuntian Tower and Rongxiu. They had never seen them before, so they didn't think about it at all. On the other hand, there were countless people with the same name in the world. It was impossible for them to recognize one person immediately, right? It wasn't until now that Rong Xiu took the initiative to mention Nan Yifan's name that they realized that something was wrong. Nan Yuxing's expression changed a few times, and finally revealed a ruthless look. "Had the Yuntian Tower's holy son. Is he that amazing? Since you know our identity, you should kneel down and beg for mercy." In the Divine Ruins world, other families and sects might be afraid of the Yuntian Tower, but they weren't. This Rong Xiu knew their identity, but he was still so arrogant. If he didn't die, who would? Rong Xiu pinched the bridge of his nose. Now he felt a little pity for Nan Yifan. He actually gave birth to such a brainless successor. He raised his eyes, looked at the few of them, and asked softly, "So, you guys don't want to leave? So, you're saying that you don't want to leave?" Chapter 1650. He spoke slowly and calmly, his expression calm and even gentle. However, when these words entered their ears, they inexplicably felt a chill run down their spines. Meeting that pair of deep and bottomless phoenix eyes, Nan Yuxing suddenly felt an inexplicable fear in his heart. However, this emotion was quickly suppressed by him. He was the young master of the Nan family. Why would he be afraid of a Yuntian Tower? "Rong Xiu, I know that you've become famous in the Divine Ruins world in the past few years. I admit that you're indeed powerful. Otherwise, you wouldn't have reached your current position. Unfortunately, there's one thing you don't know. There are some people that you can't afford to offend." As Nan Yuxing spoke, he shouted at the two elders. "Let's end this quickly. As long as they killed these two people, no one would know that they were the culprits. They would bury this news forever." However, Elder Wu Peng frowned slightly. "Young master, I'm afraid this is a little inappropriate." Although he didn't know much about Rong Xiu, he had heard some rumors about him. His methods were ruthless and decisive. He was indeed a ruthless character. The most important thing was that what he said just now didn't seem to be an act. To be able to say the name of the patriarch directly, he wasn't ordinary. Moreover, he did it so casually. Could it be that this Rong Xiu really knew the patriarch? Nan Yuxing was instantly dissatisfied. "Elder Wu Peng, you've always been swift and decisive. Why are you so hesitant today?" The other party had already bullied them to such an extent. If they still didn't retaliate, they would be laughed at. It was just killing two people. What kind of trouble could it cause? Elder Wu Peng's lips moved. He wanted to persuade a little more, but Elder Bai Tong hurriedly gave him a look. What was there to argue about? The second miss was humiliated by them, and the young master lost half his life. Even if the patriarch was here, he would definitely choose to take action. Besides, they could just kill them and dispose of their bodies without anyone knowing. No one in the world would know. What was the point of worrying so much? Elder Wu Peng's expression was cold. In the end, he swallowed the rest of his words. Whoosh! A greenish-black sickle appeared in Elder Wu Peng's hand. The cold light was biting cold, extremely sharp. "First young master and second miss, please step back," Elder Wu Peng said in a deep voice. Elder Bai Tong took a step forward at the same time, the origin power around him surging. From the looks of it, they were clearly going to fight to the death. Rong Xiu glanced at them indifferently, then retracted his gaze as if he didn't care about the situation. His attitude finally enraged the two elders. "Go!" Elder Wu Peng bellowed and took the lead to charge forward. Boom! Elder Bai Tong flicked his sleeve. An orange flame condensed into a long whip and shot straight at Chu Luiyue. However, right at this moment, Elder Bai Tong suddenly felt a sharp pain come from his leg. He immediately lowered his head to look, and his pupils shrank. At some point in time, his ankle had been entangled by a golden thread. The thread was as thin as hair, and it had appeared silently without any energy fluctuations. That was why he didn't notice it and didn't even know that he had been entangled. A ball of flame appeared in his hand again, and he wanted to burn it directly. However, what shocked Elder Bai Tong was that the golden thread was extremely tough. His flame had no effect on it at all. In fact, as the flame burned, the power in it was inexplicably gradually devoured by the golden thread. The golden thread tightened. There was a sharp pain, and dark red blood stains gradually seeped through his clothes. Elder Bai Tong was even more shocked. How could the golden thread be so powerful? Although he specialized in celestial physician, he was also a high god in terms of cultivation. Moreover, with the help of pills, his physical strength was stronger than ordinary cultivators of the same level. Why was he injured by the golden thread now? Elder Bai Tong sensed the danger. With a flick of his wrist, he withdrew the flame whip and began to deal with the golden thread around his ankle with all his strength. However, things didn't go as he wished. The golden thread began to spread upward at an even faster speed. In a short while his entire calf was tightly wrapped by the golden thread. Moreover, the golden thread continued to tighten throughout the process. More and more blood stains appeared on Elder Bai Tong's body. He finally panicked. What the hell was this? Swoosh. A greenish-black blade of light flashed past. Elder Wu Peng had sensed the danger on his side and changed direction midway to attack. The sharp side slashed down fiercely. The golden thread broke silently. Elder Bai Tong finally heaved a sigh of relief. Wu Peng, thank you, be careful. Before he could finish his sentence, Elder Bai Tong's eyes suddenly widened as he exclaimed. Elder Wu Peng focused his gaze and saw that the broken golden thread had split into two and was wrapping around the two of them. In the blink of an eye, Elder Wu Peng's scythe was wrapped by the golden thread. Moreover, it was still spreading toward Elder Wu Peng. Elder Wu Peng was about to swing his scythe when he realized that under the entanglement of the golden thread, his scythe seemed to have increased by thousands of kilograms, making it difficult to swing. Every single movement became extremely difficult. Nanyu Xing and Nanyi, who were watching from behind, were also shocked when they saw this scene. How could this Rong Xiu be so strong? At this moment, Chu Luiyue frowned slightly. Rong Xiu's expression turned cold. I already said that you're not allowed to disturb my wife's cultivation. He raised his wrist and suddenly pulled. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1651. The extremely flexible golden thread instantly tightened. Then, it directly dragged the greenish-black sickle out of Elder Wu Peng's hand. Elder Wu Peng was caught off guard, and his yuan item was easily taken away by Rong Xiu. Then the sickle flew to Rong Xiu under everyone's gaze. With a wave of his hand, the sickle appeared in his hand. The heaven-breaking sickle. If I remember correctly, this should be the first King Divine weapon that Elder Wu Peng made, right? It was also because of this that Elder Wu Peng finally became a King Divine weapon refiner. Therefore, even though Elder Wu Peng was already a venerable weapon refiner, he still valued this divine weapon very much. Elder Wu Peng's half-frozen face became even colder. This Rong Xiu, how did he even know about this? Swoosh. A dagger suddenly appeared in Rong Xiu's other hand. The dagger was only the length of one's hand. The handle was black and heavy, but the blade was as thin as a cicada's wing and almost transparent. Under the sunlight, it shone faintly. Elder Wu Peng's heart skipped a beat. Crack. A crisp breaking sound was heard. It was Elder Wu Peng's sickle, which had been directly cut in half by Rong Xiu's dagger. The cut surface was neat and smooth. Rong Xiu seemed to have destroyed Elder Wu Peng's most beloved King Divine weapon without any effort. He raised his eyebrows slightly and raised his eyes slightly. He said with a faint smile, Elder Wu Peng, it seems that your King Divine weapon is not that great. Elder Wu Peng's face instantly darkened. Rong Xiu. How dare you? The number of King Divine weapons that he had refined in his lifetime was no less than 5. However, among them, the one that he valued the most was this heaven-breaking scythe. Even though he was now a venerable weapon refiner, he still valued this King Divine weapon very much. Back then he had been stuck as a high-level weapon refiner for many years, but he was still unable to break through the threshold of a King Divine weapon refiner. Over time this had almost become his inner demon. Later on, under a series of coincidences, he finally succeeded in refining this king artifact. Not only did he successfully break through his shackles, he even broke through his own predicament. From then on, his path of cultivation was unimpeded. It was because of this that he attached great importance to this heaven-breaking scythe. Now that Rong Xiu had destroyed it in front of him, how could he not be angry? How could he swallow this anger? However, in addition to his hatred, there was also a deep shock in his heart. The dagger in Rong Xiu's hand was small and agile. It did not look much different from an ordinary dagger. But just now he had easily destroyed a King Divine artifact. In other words, this dagger was either an outstanding Emperor artifact or... A shrill scream suddenly came from the side. Elder Wu Peng was shocked and hurriedly turned his head to look. He saw that Elder Bai Tong's calf had been tightly wrapped by the golden thread again. And from the looks of it, it was even worse than the previous time. His clothes were messy with blood stains, and his flesh and blood could be vaguely seen from the wound. It was a ghastly sight. Elder Bai Tong's face was pale, and he almost fainted from the pain. The golden thread was not ordinary. Not only could it easily cut through flesh, but the edges of the wound also carried extreme burning pain. The golden thread tightened, and where it tightened, it was as if there were red-hot iron rods scraping past his body. Sizzle, a scalp-numbing burning sound came. Elder Bai Tong trembled as he lowered his head to take a look. For a moment his mind was blank. Burn wounds had actually appeared on his legs. His skin, blood, and flesh were even terrifyingly charred. Elder Bai Tong began to struggle desperately, using all his strength to try to break free. But no matter what he did, the golden thread would not disperse. Every time it was broken, it would become stronger and more numerous. One of the threads suddenly tightened. An ice-cold pain instantly spread throughout his body. Half of Elder Bai Tong's calf had been silently sliced apart. The incision on the wound was very neat, and even the ghastly white bone could be seen. This scene deeply agitated Elder Bai Tong, causing him to be shocked and angry. Deep in his heart, there was also a strong sense of fear that spread. Many emotions surged and finally he could not bear it anymore. His chest shook violently, and he spat out a mouthful of blood before falling heavily to the ground. Bang! With a muffled sound, smoke and dust rose from the ground. Elder Bai Tong, Nan Yuxing and Nanny finally regained their senses, and they could hardly believe their eyes. The two elders attacked together, but they were actually at a disadvantage? Rong Xiuhe, how did he do it? Elder Wu Peng stared at the wound on Elder Bai Tong's body and gradually clenched his fists. Bai Tong was a celestial physician, and he could transform his force into flames to refine pills. Therefore ordinary flames could not hurt him at all. But now he was burned by a golden thread, and half of his leg was directly cut off by the other party. This Rong Xiu was clearly more terrifying than the rumors. Just what level had his strength reached? You, Elder Wu Peng was about to speak, but Rong Xiu suddenly raised a finger. Shu. There was a clear light in his deep eyes, but the expression between his brows was distant, disdainful, and indifferent. Elder Wu Peng suddenly seemed to be strangled by something, and the rest of his words were silently crushed in his throat, and he could no longer say anything. In Chu Liyue's mind, several Xian formations were arranged in a disorderly and picturesque manner. Each Xian formation was shining brightly, and its might was awe-inspiring. However, they were all separated from each other by a great distance. A stream of light flew out from the Xian formation in the middle, and quickly connected with the Xian formation beside it. Then a second and third one followed. Chu Liyue's heart unconsciously tensed up. She wanted to connect all these Xian formations together, but it was not easy to do so. She could no longer remember how many times she had tried, and her physical and mental strength were greatly depleted. The only consolation was that her results would be more outstanding than the previous time. It was also this that supported Chu Liyue to grit her teeth and persevere. More and more Xian formations were connected. The might on them also began to stack layer upon layer. Finally there was only one Xian formation left. Chu Liyue subconsciously held her breath, and her mind was extremely tense. She knew too well what it meant if she succeeded this time. If she did not experience it personally, even she would not believe that someone could attempt to break through from a Xian Emperor Master to a great Xian Emperor Master in just a few months. Bang bang. Bang bang. Chu Liyue's heart was beating rapidly, and it was almost about to jump out of her chest. But actually, thinking about it carefully, this matter was also within reason. Because she had already become a Xian Emperor Master a few years ago. Countless incomparably mysterious Xian formations were recorded in her mind. She could not help but thank De Bao for this. If not for him, she would not have been able to reach this step so quickly. Chu Liyue's thoughts moved. The last stream of light flew out lightly, and tightly connected with the last Xian formation. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 1652. Crack. An indistinct but clear shattering sound could be heard. Chu Liyue suddenly opened her eyes. In an instant, there seemed to be stars flickering in the depths of her eyes, incomparably resplendent. An indescribable pressure spread out from her body. A great mystic king teacher. Rong Xiu's thin lips curled up slightly. He knew that she could succeed. This matter might be as difficult as ascending to the heavens for ordinary people. But to Chu Liyue, who had repaired the sky shuttle formation before, it was much easier. However, this scene caused the nearby first-tier people to be dumbstruck. This aura is... Nanny was a mystic master and had good talent, so she was especially sensitive to this. Her eyes widened slightly, and her face was filled with disbelief. That woman looked to be only 17 or 18 years old. How could she have broken through to a great mystic king teacher? Even she, who was already 24 years old, had yet to see the threshold of a great mystic king teacher. She couldn't help but grab Nan Yuxing's sleeve. Big brother, did I sense wrongly? Nan Yuxing's expression was extremely ugly. Although he wasn't a mystic master, he had seen many mystic masters. That woman had indeed broken through to a great mystic king teacher. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, even he wouldn't have believed that there was such a young great mystic king teacher in this world. Moreover, she seemed to have broken through in less than a day. She must have used some method. Nan Yuxing gritted his teeth. When Nanny heard this, she dispelled the last bit of hope in her heart. Method? How was that possible? Martial artists might be able to use some method to forcefully increase their strength and realm within a certain period of time. But it was absolutely impossible for a mystic master. She had broken through, so it was true. Nanny's body swayed and she almost fell to the ground. Everything in front of her was too big a blow to her. First, Elder Bai Tong and Elder Wu Peng were suppressed by Rong Xiu one after another. Then, that woman broke through to become a great mystic king teacher. If she still had a certain amount of pride in this aspect before and thought that she was more outstanding than the other party, all of this had been shattered now. Elder Wu Peng had just finished treating Elder Bai Tong's injuries. When he sensed the commotion, he lifted his head to take a look. His eyes were deep. At this point, if they still underestimated the Rong Xiu duo, they would be extremely stupid. Nan Yuxing couldn't help but take a step forward. Elder Wu Peng, we can't let them live. Elder Wu Peng frowned with complicated emotions in his eyes. Of course, he knew that if he allowed the two of them to leave, there would be endless trouble in the future. But Nan Yuxing and Bai Tong were severely injured, and Nanny was clearly weaker than the other party. Even if he went all out, he might not be able to finish them off before the two of them sent out the news. If word of this got out, they would still be in trouble. At that time, the situation would only get worse. More importantly, they had come to the Godslayer mound in search of that thing. He had yet to find the item, but he was already heavily injured. If it was delayed because of this, then the gains would not make up for the losses. Elder Wu Peng lowered his eyes and glanced at Elder Bai Tong. Bai Tong, what do you think? Elder Bai Tong's face was pale and resentful. No one would be able to accept having their calf chopped off so easily. Not to mention someone like Elder Bai Tong. He had never thought that after being so powerful for so long, he would be defeated by such a young man in the end. He wanted to take revenge more than anyone else. But he also knew what Elder Wu Peng was thinking. After hesitating for a while, Elder Bai Tong finally gritted his teeth and said, "Let's go back first, Elder Bai Tong?" Nan Yuxing suddenly interrupted him, almost thinking that he had heard wrongly. He had lost a part of his calf, and now he was planning to let it go? Elder Bai Tong closed his eyes. How could he not want revenge? But in the current situation, leaving first was the best choice. After finding that thing and completing the mission given by the Patriarch, wouldn't they have plenty of time and opportunities to look for the two of them? Nan Yuxing gradually clenched his fists. At first, he only wanted to find trouble with them and teach them a lesson because they had humiliated his sister. But now, they had suffered losses and been humiliated by the other party. Nan Yuxing, who was used to being high and mighty, could not accept this. He slowly looked up. Chu Luiyue had completely woken up from her breakthrough state. She had just stood up when Rong Xiu walked over. "Congratulations, you, or." The coldness in his eyes melted at this moment and was replaced by a gentle smile. Chu Luiyue also smiled, her eyes curved. "It's all thanks to your guidance. If not for that game of chess with Rong Xiu, she did not know when she would be able to comprehend and break through." Rong Xiu raised his eyebrows, bowed his head slightly, looked into her eyes seriously, and asked with a low smile, "Then, is there a reward?" The two of them were very close at this moment. When he spoke, a warm breath and a faint cold fragrance silently wrapped around Chu Luiyue. Chu Luiyue stretched out her finger and lightly tapped on his chest. She leaned back slightly and her red lips curled up slightly. "There are people here. Your Highness, please restrain yourself." As she spoke, she turned around and looked at those people. Her eyes curved as she greeted them. "Gentlemen, what a coincidence. We meet again?" "Coincidence? Coincidence, my ass." Seeing the smile on Chu Luiyue's face, the suppressed anger in Nan Yuxing and the rest's hearts burned fiercely. This woman definitely did it on purpose. Relying on the fact that she had broken through to the great mystic king master level, she did not put others in her eyes. "You." Nan Yuxing was furious. "You don't know what's good for you." Chu Luiyue blinked in surprise, as if she had not realized what had happened. "I wonder if this young master," Nan Yuxing Rong Xiu reminded. There was no need to be polite with such people. Chu Luiyue coughed. "I wonder where young Master Nanyu's words came from?" Playing dumb. Nan Yuxing laughed in anger. You really don't know? Don't tell me that you don't know what the man beside you did. Moreover, that little girl in the Scarlet Soul Forest was summoned by this woman. Come to think of it, these two people still owed them. Chu Luiyue looked at Rongxiu. She touched her chin with one hand as if she was thinking about something. My husband, hasn't he always been helping you? Nan Yuxing and the rest could not believe that Chu Luiyue could say such words. They were in an extremely sorry state and were covered in wounds. Wasn't it all caused by Rongxiu? She actually had the nerve to lie through her teeth. Ah, good. I finally understand now. There's nothing to say to the two of you. A string in Nan Yuxing's mind suddenly snapped. With a flick of his sleeve, something quickly flew towards Chu Luiyue. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from the Love Network. Chapter 1653. His attack was too sudden and his movements were extremely fast. By the time everyone reacted, that thing had already flown in front of Chu Luiyue. Chu Luiyue looked over. It was a completely white jade toad. The jade toad's carvings were extremely detailed. Under the white skin, one could even faintly see faint red bones and blood vessels. Those pair of dark eyes seemed to be filled with coldness, causing one to feel a chill in their hearts. At first glance, it was extremely lifelike, almost no different from the real thing. Chu Luiyue's eyes turned cold. It seemed that Nan Yuxing really wanted her life. He had even taken out this thing. This jade toad was carved out of an extremely rare 1,000-year-old cold jade. Its entire body was filled with dense poisonous gas and was extremely lethal. If one wanted to unleash the full power of this jade toad, it would need to be placed in the body of a cultivator and nourished with their essence, blood and qi. The longer the time, the more powerful the jade toad would be. However, during this process the cultivator would have to endure extreme pain. The longer the time, the more terrifying the torture would be. From the looks of this jade toad, Nan Yuxing must have spent a lot of effort on it. Now that he had taken out this item, it was obvious that he really wanted her life. Rongxiu was about to attack when he suddenly raised his eyebrows and stopped. Chu Luiyue narrowed her eyes and a cluster of golden flames suddenly appeared in her palm. The jade toad was about to fly over. At this moment, a black light blade suddenly appeared out of nowhere. Clang. The two collided with a crisp sound. Then the jade toad instantly flew out and fell to the ground. A crack could be clearly seen on its back. Before Nan Yuxing's smile could fully spread, it suddenly froze. This jade toad was refined by him after a year of hard work. He usually treasured it and rarely used it. He did not expect it to be destroyed just like that. One must know that once a crack appeared on it, it could not be repaired. It was equivalent to a year's worth of hard work being wasted. He looked at Chu Luiyue and Rongxiu in shock and anger as blood rushed to his head. You, young Master Nanyu, you saw it clearly. It was not the two of us who attacked. Before he could say anything, Chu Luiyue spoke first. Nan Yuxing was so angry that he felt dizzy. Not the two of you? Then who could it be? A ghost. However, Elder Wu Peng frowned. He saw clearly that Rongxiu did not move. That black light blade indeed seemed to have appeared out of thin air. He looked at the black blade of light. After knocking the jade toad down, it quietly floated in the air. The dense black color seemed to want to swallow everything around it. An inexplicable sense of uneasiness arose in his heart. Young master, he took a step back of his voice. A low and hoarse voice suddenly came from the black blade of light. How can I allow others to covet the people I want to kill? Indifference, disdain, and sinister. It was filled with a strong killing intent. It was almost enough to make one shudder. As soon as the words were spoken, a terrifying aura descended upon the place. Nan Yuxing had not recovered from his serious injuries. Now that he was overwhelmed by anger, he could not bear the pressure and spat out a mouthful of blood. Big brother. Nan Yi hurriedly supported him, her face full of anxiety. What's wrong? Who is speaking? She looked in the direction of the voice. She was shocked and angry, but more than that, she was deeply afraid. Although she was usually spoiled and willful, she was still very talented in cultivation. Otherwise she would not have been so doted on. She could clearly feel that the owner of that voice was terrifyingly strong. Who are you? The black light blade gradually transformed into a tall figure from the thick black fog. That person was wearing a long black robe. The hood hung down and covered his face, making it impossible to see clearly. A strong murderous aura spread from his body. Nanny's remaining words were suddenly stuck in her throat. She subconsciously covered her mouth and took a step back in fear. This person, is too dangerous. That man looked at Nan Yuxing. Were you the one who attacked just now? He asked slowly, but every word seemed to carry a bone-piercing chill. The pressure around Nan Yuxing increased again. He could not bear it and directly knelt on the ground. Bang! Elder Wu Peng immediately stood in front of him and said in a low voice, "Sir, let's talk things over." His mind raced as he recalled everything that had happened just now. An absurd guess appeared in his heart. Sensing the dangerous aura from the other party, he swallowed with difficulty and his throat tightened. We have no intention of going against you. It's just that we have some grudges with these two people. Eldest young master was angry and attacked. But we really have no other intentions. The black-robed man looked at Chu Luiyue and let out a strange laugh, but no one could detect any laughter. Sheng Guanyu, you are as good at causing trouble as always. I'm just a little late and you've already provoked another enemy. It seems that there are really many people who want to kill you. Chu Luiyue smiled. Thank you for the compliment. I actually don't like to cause trouble. Trouble often comes to me. They're like that. Aren't you the same? Hearing Chu Luiyue's words, Elder Wu Peng and the others were secretly shocked. It seems that Sheng Guanyu really knows this mysterious black-robed man? And she seemed to have expected that he would appear? The black-robed man suddenly sneered. You are as bold as ever. Chu Luiyue smiled and nodded. How can I be considered bold? You asked me to come here to die, so I'm here now. The two of them only spoke a few words, but there was an undercurrent surging. Nan Yuxing and the others were completely stunned at this moment. Judging from this, they seemed to have made an agreement to fight to the death here, right? Then, as if sensing their gazes, Chu Luiyue looked back and curled the corners of her lips into a half-smile. I've already said that my husband helped you out of kindness, but you didn't appreciate it. Now it's better for you to stay here with us. But whether you live or die depends on your own abilities. Elder Wu Peng had already realized the seriousness of the matter. Although he didn't know the identity of the other party, he knew that with the other party's strength, it would be easy for the other party to keep them here. They were here to look for something, not to die. Sir, today's matter is purely a misunderstanding. We have no intention of fighting with you. We'll leave now and make room for you. As Elder Wu Peng spoke, he took a step back and was about to leave with the others. Wait. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1654. Did I allow you to leave? The black-robed man spoke slowly. Every word was like a mountain that weighed heavily on the hearts of Nan Yuxing and the others. Elder Wu Peng turned around and cupped his fists. We really didn't mean to disturb you and have already apologized. May I know what else you're unhappy about? Was there something wrong with this person? Since he wanted to kill Sheng Guanyu, why didn't he just do it directly? What did it have to do with them? Even if Nan Yuxing attacked just now, he didn't hit him. Didn't he stop him? Wasn't that enough? Elder Wu Peng was a weapon refining supremacy and had a high status. When had he ever spoken so humbly to anyone? If Nan Yuxing and Elder Bai Tong weren't injured today and they still had important matters to attend to, he definitely wouldn't be so polite to this person. The man sneered disdainfully as if he had heard a joke. You casually trespassed into my territory, acted presumptuously, and then left just like that. How can there be such a good thing in this world? Elder Wu Peng was shocked. You said this is your territory? Nanny couldn't help but say. Who doesn't know that countless experts are buried in the god-slaying ground? But now you say this is your territory. Do you really think we're that easy to fool? Although she was a little afraid of the black-robed man, she couldn't help but refute him. Of all things, why did he say this was his territory? This was the tombs of the god-slaying ground. The black-robed man suddenly raised his hand and clenched it. Nanny suddenly felt as if her neck was being strangled by an invisible hand. Her entire body was lifted up. Because she couldn't breathe, her face quickly flushed red. No matter how hard she struggled, she couldn't break free. Second miss. Nan Yuxing and the others panicked when they saw this scene. They didn't expect the black-robed man to attack without saying anything. Elder Wu Peng wanted to fight back, but after thinking carefully, since the other party appeared here, whether this was his territory or not, it would definitely be beneficial to him. It wouldn't be good if he acted rashly. Sir, we're from the Nan family of the All Saints sect. Please think twice before you act. Do you really want to go against the All Saints sect? The black-robed man chuckled. So you are from the Nan family. No wonder you are so arrogant. It was a pity that he didn't seem to have a brain. Nan Yuxing couldn't help but take a step forward. You, Elder Bai Tong hurriedly pulled him back. Young master. The second miss was still in his hands. Nan Yuxing gritted his teeth and forced himself to endure. Elder Wu Ping didn't look any better. The humiliation and torment they had suffered today was more than what they had suffered in the past few years combined. Unfortunately, Nanny was in his hands now and they didn't dare to do anything. The strength of Nanny's struggle gradually weakened, leaving only blurred words that came out of her mouth. Didn't you want to kill her? Since this man's target was the Shangguanyu, why didn't he attack her directly instead of torturing her? However, she did not know that their actions just now had already angered the other party. Due to the lack of oxygen, her vision began to darken and her consciousness began to blur. Just when Nanny thought that she was really going to die here, the man in the black robe finally let go. Bam! Nanny's body was thrown heavily to the ground. The rough ground left many scratches on her body. The clothes on her back were torn, revealing streaks of bright red scars. Ah! Nanny was angry and embarrassed, but she didn't even have the strength to get up. Elder Wu Peng hurriedly went over, took out a coat and draped it over her and helped her up. Seeing Nanny's miserable appearance, it was impossible for Nan Yuxing and the others to not be angry. But now it was good enough that she was back. They didn't dare to ask for anything else. Killing you will dirty my hands. The man in the black robe said casually. Nanny's face was red and white, but she didn't dare to say another word. Her body was trembling violently. Chu Liwei crossed her arms and raised her eyebrows slightly. It was a pity that a good show had ended just like that. However, she didn't want to use this man to get rid of those people. This man was here for her, so he naturally wasn't interested in others. It was already a pleasant surprise to see them suffer. She exhaled softly, looked at the man in the black robe and said with a faint smile. Let's get to the main topic quickly. If we continue to pester them like this, it won't be good to delay them from finding the treasure. Nan Yuxing and the others' expressions changed. Could it be that Shangguanyu already knew the purpose of their trip? But looking at her expression, it didn't seem like it. Treasure? The man in the black robe was stunned for a moment, then seemed to realize something and laughed ambiguously. Nan Yuxing and the others became even more nervous. However, just when they thought that the man in the black robe was going to make things difficult for them, they suddenly heard him say, "Why aren't you getting lost?" Elder Wu Peng made a prompt decision and hurriedly left with the three of them. They were more or less injured, but their speed was surprisingly fast. In a short while their figures were already far away. It was as if they were afraid that the man in the black robe would regret it. "I'm here for the appointment. Where's my father?" The person in the way had already left, so Chu Liwei went straight to the point. The smile on her face faded a lot, and the aura around her became cold. The man in the black robe waved his sleeve. The void beside him trembled. Then a black cage quietly appeared. A familiar figure was chained up by a chain and trapped within it. It was Chu Ning, whom she hadn't seen for a long time. At this moment he was in a sorry state, thin and haggard. His clothes were tattered and stained with dirty blood. His hair was messy and scattered, almost covering half of his face. Chu Liwei could only see his unusually pale and cracked lips. However, with just one glance, she recognized that the person was Chu Ning. Father. Chu Liu's heart was suddenly filled with endless sorrow. The man in the black robe suddenly laughed. Speaking of which, this Chu Ning was only fated with you for a short period of time. I didn't expect that you would really be willing to come to save him. Chu Liu suppressed her emotions and laughed coldly. Didn't you already know when you attacked him? She was reborn into Chu Liu's body and became father and daughter with Chu Ning. Although they didn't spend much time together, during that time, Chu Ning had always treated her as his own daughter. He gave his heart and soul to her and even risked his life for her. In Chu Liu's heart, she had long regarded him as her father. She was Shangguanyu and also Chu Liu. Therefore, even if she knew that this trip was full of danger, she still came. You did everything you could to get me to come here. Now that I'm here, you should keep your promise and let my father go. Digression. The fifth watch was around 12:30 p.m. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 1655. If you want me to let him go, it's very simple. The black-robed man stretched out his hand. Just give me that thing. Under the sleeve was a translucent palm. It could be seen that this time he appeared as a soul and did not possess another body. Chu Liu narrowed her eyes slightly. This man's strength seemed to be much stronger than before. But, Perhaps it was because the previous ones were just his doppelgangers. And the one in front of her was the real him. This time he set the meeting place at the god-slaying tomb. Chu Liwei guessed that he should have some plans. Sure enough, this was probably the only place where he could unleash his full strength. Although they had not officially fought from the situation just now, there was no doubt that he was almost at the level of a god. Chu Liwei thought and frowned slightly. Previously, she had secretly inquired about this person's identity. He used to be a member of the Black Demon Cave, and his status was not low, but later he was expelled from the sect. It was reasonable to say that such a person should be easy to find. However, Chu Liwei could not find any relevant information. The Black Demon Cave seemed to have sealed this information, and there was no news about it in the outside world. So until now, she was still not clear about the other party's identity. What, could it be that we haven't seen each other for so long that you have forgotten what I want? The black-robed man's tone seemed to be a little impatient. Chu Liwei looked up and curled the corners of her lips without a smile. Of course not. For that water droplet, this man had schemed against her countless times. How could she forget? She lifted her foot and walked forward. Rongxiu suddenly spoke. Chu Liwei turned around. The two of them looked at each other. Be careful. Chu Liwei gently nodded, then turned and continued to walk forward. Rongxiu stood in place, one hand behind his back, and his phoenix eyes slightly raised. The black-robed man seemed to have sensed something and laughed. Rongxiu could indeed protect her. But here, even Rongxiu was no match for him. Fortunately, Rongxiu was a smart person and did not seem to have any intention of fighting. At this moment, Chu Liwei was only 10 steps away from the black-robed man. She stood still. Hand over the person, hand over the goods. The black-robed man did not hesitate. With a wave of his sleeve, the cage flew directly to Chu Liwei. As long as you give it to me obediently, this cage will automatically disperse. But if you try to play any tricks, trust me, he will only die faster. The black-robed man's voice was hoarse and gloomy. At this moment, there was a hint of threat in his voice, which made people feel even more uncomfortable. Chu Liwei ignored him and looked at Chu Ning in the cage. She was a little far away just now and she was in a hurry, so she didn't get a good look. At this moment, the two of them were only one step apart. She could see every wound on Chu Ning's body clearly. He must have fainted. Both of them had been talking for so long, but he still hadn't woken up. His injuries should be very serious. Chu Liui's heart seemed to be tightly gripped by something, and she found it difficult to breathe. After so long, she didn't know how much Daddy had suffered, and all of this was because of her. If it wasn't for her, he might still be in Yaochen, living a peaceful life. He wouldn't be wandering around and suffering like he was now. Chu Liui's eyes were sour and hot tears fell silently. Father? Chu Ning's brows suddenly moved. In his dizziness, he seemed to have heard a familiar voice. You are? A strong desire to meet him burned wildly in the depths of his heart. Then Chu Ning's eyelashes trembled, and he actually slowly opened his eyes. Chu Liwei had been looking at him the whole time, so of course she noticed his movements immediately. For a moment she was both surprised and happy. Father, you're awake? Chu Ning had been unconscious for too long. Now that he suddenly opened his eyes, he felt that the surrounding sunlight was incomparably dazzling, causing his eyes to hurt. However, he didn't dare to close his eyes. He only stared blankly at the person in front of him. His vision gradually cleared. The face that he had missed for countless days and nights finally appeared in front of him again. Her eyebrows were like distant mountains and her black eyes were like stars. Chu Ning's heart beat quickly, and the blood in his body seemed to be boiling at this moment. You are? His voice was very soft, and because he hadn't spoken for a long time, his voice was unbelievably hoarse. However, Chu Liwei still heard it clearly. She quickly wiped away her tears and outlined a bright smile. Father, it's me. The familiar voice entered his ears, knocking on his eardrums. Even his heart felt as if it had been hammered a few times by something. Chu Ning was stunned. The bright sunlight was so piercing that his tears flowed silently. This familiar eyebrows, this familiar voice, it's you, it's really her. The corners of Chu Ning's mouth moved, and he suddenly raised his hand as if he wanted to touch Chu Liui's face. However, halfway through raising his arm, he suddenly fell weakly. His body was too weak, and he couldn't even complete such a simple action. Chu Ning smiled bitterly. It's all because father is useless. Unexpectedly. I can't even hug our Yu. Even he himself didn't know how he had endured such a long time. He only thought that he couldn't leave you, behind. Just like that, day after day, it seemed that the darkness would never end. But today, finally, Chu Liyue's tears fell again. However, the smile on her face was even more brilliant and bright. She said softly, "Father, is here to take you home." Digression: an author who was beaten down by her period has no right to ask for more chapters. See you tomorrow. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from the Love Network. Chapter 1656. Clap, clap, clap. The black-robed man clapped his hands and said with a faint smile, "What a touching scene. Shengguan Liyue, as long as you give me that thing now, you can take him back immediately. Father and daughter are reunited. Isn't that so?" Chu Ning suddenly came back to his senses when he heard the voice. He turned his head and looked at the black-robed man. His eyebrows suddenly knitted together. This man had taken him away from the wilderness and trapped him in this cage. It turned out that he wanted to threaten you, what does he want from you? Chu Ning grasped the bars of the cage tightly and asked worriedly. Although his body and mind were on the verge of collapse, he was still clear-headed when it came to you. This man was so powerful that it was beyond his imagination. What could a man like him not have? It could be imagined that the thing he wanted was definitely not ordinary, since it could make him go through so much trouble. It was very likely that it was something extremely important to you. What exactly does he want? Chu Ning stared at Chu Liyue. "I don't want you to make such a big sacrifice for me." "You?" Chu Liyue smiled comfortingly. "Father, don't worry. Since I'm here, I've already made my decision. Nothing is more important to me than you." Chu Ning's heart ached and ached for her. He was smart. From Chu Liyue's answer, he was sure that what the black-robed man wanted to exchange with her was definitely a rare treasure. What was more, it was extremely important to her. Chu Ning shook his head and said slowly and firmly, "No. I'm already an arrow at the end of its flight. The reason why I've been able to hold on until today is because I want to see you again. Now that I've seen you, I have no more regrets in my heart." He didn't know what kind of agreement you had with the black-robed man, but he was sure that you must have made a concession. "In the past, I've never been willing to let you suffer, and now, it's still the same." Chu Ning looked deeply at Chu Liyue and his voice became weaker and weaker. It was just a matter of life and death. He didn't want you to suffer even more pressure and pain because of him. "Father, there's not much I can do for you, cough cough. The only thing I can do is to not drag you down, cough cough." Chu Liyue frowned slightly. "Father, we are father and daughter. We are connected by blood. How could this be considered a burden? Saving you is what I should do." She didn't finish her sentence. Chu Ning looked at her with deep eyes and suddenly smiled. This glance, this smile was already worth 1,000 words. He said, You've worked hard these past few years." Chu Liyue's heart seemed to have been hit by something. She pursed her lips. Actually, he should have thought of it earlier. Ever since she left Yaoqin, returned to Tianling and came to the Divine Ruins world, so many things had happened in such a long time. How could he not know anything? She could openly admit that she was from Shangguanyu in front of everyone. However, she still subconsciously returned to being Chu Liyue in front of Chu Ning. Is timid by nature. Why did her temperament suddenly change so much and become another person? Even if her appearance and figure are exactly the same and her memory is exactly the same, but no one knows a daughter better than a father. Chu Ning gently closed his eyes. Of course he already knew. Even if everything was correct, there were still some things that he could sense. Chu Liyue's hand slowly tightened. In fact, Chu Ning had suspected her identity a long time ago. She thought that she hid it well and that he believed her. But she didn't expect. "Ever since you became my daughter, I haven't been able to do anything for you. On the contrary, you have done so much." A trace of guilt appeared on Chu Ning's face. She was extremely outstanding. He was proud of her and also proud of her. "Your is gone, but the heavens have lowered the curtain and brought you here. If possible, I want you to be my daughter for the rest of your life. But I was too greedy in the end." At this point, he didn't want to drag her down. "You have a great future ahead of you. Everything you have today is because of your hard work. There's no need to compromise again and again because of me." Chu Ning opened his eyes. His weary eyes were suffused with red. He wanted to live like this for the rest of his life, but if there's a chance in the next life, Father? Chu Liyue suddenly opened her mouth and interrupted him. Her voice was very soft, but her eyes were incomparably sincere. She looked at Chu Ning, almost looking into his heart. Father Ur is your daughter. She was in the past, now, and in the future. Therefore she had to save this person today. As she spoke, she straightened up and looked at the black-robed man. Then she closed her eyes and held her breath in concentration. Just as Chuning reacted to her words, he saw her suddenly stretch out her hand. After a short moment of silence, a strange totem suddenly appeared in her palm. Then, the totem gradually floated up and condensed into a longan-sized water droplet at a speed visible to the naked eye. The water droplet was dazzling. The totem was engraved on its surface and could be seen clearly. From afar, it looked like a precious treasure that was meticulously carved out of colorful jade. The brilliance flowed and had a myriad of charm. Chuning's heart seemed to be tightly gripped by something. Although he didn't know what it was, he could feel that it was definitely not an ordinary item. Moreover, it seemed to be extremely important to you. When the water droplet appeared, her face seemed to have paled a little. As for the black-robed man, after seeing the water droplet, there was an obvious fluctuation in his aura. Chu Liwe stared ahead and then flicked her wrist. Since you want it, take it. Swoosh. The black-robed man flicked his sleeve and snatched the water droplet in a hurry. A ball of thick black fog gushed out from his palm and quickly enveloped the water droplet. At a glance, the originally brilliant water droplet seemed to be covered with a layer of shadow and became much dimmer. The dense pressure and aura on it seemed to be suppressed in an instant. Soon, the water droplet fell into the black-robed man's palm. He looked greedily at the water droplet in his hand. Because of his excitement, even the surrounding space began to fluctuate. Finally, in order to find this item, he had spent a lot of time and suffered a lot of torture. Now this item had finally fallen into his hands. Chu Liwe said coldly. Now, can you let go of my father? The black-robed man reluctantly moved his gaze away from the water droplet and looked up at Chu Liwe. You're quite obedient. He originally thought that she would play some tricks, but now it seemed that he had worried too much. Just for Chuning she would give up such a precious treasure. Only she would do such a stupid thing. He laughed complacently and gloomily. Sure. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.